Good evening. Welcome to the San Carlos City Council Redevelopment Agency meeting of September 12, 2005. At this time, I'd like to request everyone stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Next item on our agenda this evening is changes to the order of the agenda. To my fellow council members, are there any changes to the order of the agenda? Any from staff?
No, Madam Mayor.
Or anyone from the public wishing to make any changes? Okay. Agenda stands as published. Under report from closed session, we did have a closed session this evening pertaining to the conference with the labor negotiator. Direction was given to staff. However, no action was taken. Under council reports, Tom, do you want to start this evening? Council reports? Do you have anything to report?
Sure. I have a lot of good stuff.
Your mic's on. You just need to pull it closer.
All right. Thank you. First of all, I want to remind everyone that the San Carlos Sister City Association is sponsoring their 10th annual Taste of Italy this coming Saturday night. Tickets are still available at $15 a piece. This is held in the downtown park. The food, as you probably know, is contributed by the restaurants on Laurel Street, and all the proceeds go to the Sister City Association. So we encourage everyone to attend that who can. I'll give you a telephone number for reservations and information. It's 650-369-4451. That's 369-4451. And then as long as you're marking your calendar, you might as well mark for the next Saturday night when the Lions Club will have a tri-tip dinner at the community church. I have tickets for that. If you'd like them, I'm at 591-1519. Now, on to some city business. I'd like to give you a short update on the Fields Committee. We continue to meet on the first and the third Thursday of each month. We're making good progress. I would hope that within another month or two we will have we will come to a decision and recommendation that we can bring forward. This recommendation will go first of all to the Park and Rec Commission for review, then back to the committee for finalization, and then to the City Council. So we're quite optimistic that this is going to be a good report and is going to give the city some relief on its much-needed field space. Finally, I'd like to comment on some news information that you may have seen recently, and this is regarding the potential or the possibility of San Carlos adopting a sister city in the hurricane area in Louisiana and Mississippi. This all came about through the Ministerial Association in San Carlos, who met shortly after the event and questioned whether they could do something, or the city could do something, or how do we get involved and help these poor people. It turns out that Mary Graves, a pastor at Trinity Presbyterian, called her good friend Cheryl Pomerick of the Chamber of Commerce, and Cheryl took the ball and has been carrying it ever since. So Cheryl would like to give us a report as to where she stands and where we believe that we can take this project.
I'm Cheryl Pomerick with the San Carlos Chamber of Commerce. And the fact is that as the City of Good Living, we're really richly blessed in this town. And it's especially apparent when you look at the devastation and the personal toll that the hurricane took on so many, not just the big cities like Biloxi and New Orleans, but the small towns that are there too. And I've been in correspondence with someone from a chamber back there that I knew through some classes I took. And, you know, she goes on about just there's no chamber. They had a brand new chamber. That's gone, but she said all the businesses are gone too. So where do we start? And from this abundance that we have, it just seemed in working with the Ministerial Association that it might be possible to adopt a city that would be a similar size and, relationship of commercial and retail and so forth to San Carlos, and that we might work with that city both on a financial, a professional level, but also on personal relationships as well. And I kind of see this might be a 2 or 3 year commitment on our part. The ways that I see that we might work with this, businesses here might want to help with the rebuilding of the business community in this small town. Maybe help direct some of our business there, if that would help support them as they get started again, or serve as advisors in the business community. I see that the schools here might send books or supplies or have the kids do donations of things that would be appropriate for school children in another community. The kids might even, here in San Carlos, might even be internet pen pals for children as the internet services come up back there. The churches are willing to work with congregations back there to help with rebuilding with hymnals or Bibles or Sunday school supplies. And church classes here could write letters to Sunday school classes back there, kind of an exchange situation. The Friends of the Library here might donate books for the rebuilding of their libraries, or even perhaps funds from one of the book sales would be donated to the hurricane victims. Service clubs have stepped up and said that they're willing to look at how they might help. They could send money, teams to help back there, or they could adopt the service club, like the Rotary Club here, adopt the Rotary Club back there and see what kind of support they might need. I'm not sure where this goes or how we organize it, but we will have a meeting on Thursday morning at 8:30 at the Chamber for anyone who's interested in being part of the task force, and look at what do we have to do to adopt a city, to find a city first that's similar in demographics, and then to what kind of assistance do they need in rebuilding. I hope to have a little bit more information on those lines before Thursday. And it's interesting, I have not seen this in the paper, but I have had several calls saying that it has been in the paper and other cities want to imitate what we're trying to start. Even got a call from Walla Walla, Washington today. The gentleman said, "Oh, tell me how you've done this. We want to do the same thing." So I think there's a lot of interest in this, and I think it would be a nice feather in San Carlos' cap to share our blessings.
Good. Thank you very much, Cheryl.
Okay.
So stay tuned, and we'll report back to you. I'll be attending the meeting on Thursday. Just to second it, with Cheryl's statement, we have had a lot of interest both in service clubs and other organizations. The Elms Assisted Living facility at their last board meeting agreed to contribute 2 beds, 1 studio and 1 dementia bed for a period of 6 to 12 months to some needy person from that area. We think that we can probably also get medical assistance through Sequoia Hospital, and if necessary, we can arrange for transportation. So we're reporting that back to the key people in that area. And that's just one example of the way people have stepped forward. I also want to compliment the city and those in the city who've been involved. I noticed a couple of signs over the weekend. People are having garage sales with the proceeds going to the hurricane area. So all that looks good, and hopefully this process Cheryl described will galvanize the community and allow us all to step forward together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. I would just ask my fellow council members, do you think we ought to put it on our next agenda meeting, and we can discuss it in terms of how we as a council
A good idea.
can support it? Okay.
I would like that, yes.
Brian or Christine, if you could get that on our next council meeting agenda, that would be awesome. Matt, anything?
Yeah, I have a number of items. Thank you. The first one's just something that I wanted to comment on my way here. I was driving down Britton Avenue on the way here, and I saw a gentleman who was out running. And as he was running, he was stopping and he kind of reminded me of Tom with his stuff downtown. As the guy was running, he was stopping and picking up trash. And I just thought that's pretty commendable, and I think it's that kind of citizen with civic pride that makes San Carlos the place that it is and a great place to live. So I just wanted to comment on that real quick. We received a letter from the San Francisco PUC Water Department, or actually from the San Francisco County and City Planning Department regarding the SFPUC Water System Improvement Program, and a notice of preparation of an environmental impact report and notice of public scoping meetings. And I wanted to ask staff if they could to put this information that's provided here on the meetings. There are 3 meetings that people in our area could attend, one in Fremont, one in Palo Alto, and one in San Francisco. if anybody's interested in this project and what's going on, they may want to attend those meetings. So, Brian, I'll give this information to staff if you don't already have it, and perhaps we could post that on the website for those who are individuals who are interested. Second item is we received a letter from Joe Simidian, and he's inviting all folks who are in the 11th Senate District to a town hall meeting on Saturday, September 24th from 10 a.m. to noon in the City Council chambers of Palo Alto City Hall. The third item was I just wanted to get an idea from staff. I'd brought up the letter that we had received from the California Apartment Association. I just want to make sure we're on top of that, Brian, in terms of if we're going to support that legislation, that we do so in a timely manner.
Which legislation was this?
This is the Assembly Bill 438, sponsored by PARA, and the bill would permit rental housing providers to use the sex offender database to protect residents.
I
so
think
on and so
we
forth.
referred that to police department, but let me check.
Okay, because if we're going to take action on that as a council and support that bill, we need to do so in a timely fashion. Third item is I took a look at the letter that we wrote back to the grand jury regarding our contracting practices, and so did some other citizens. That came out, if you remember, late on a Friday. I myself was away for the weekend, didn't get anything back till, I didn't really see it till Monday. I've since taken a look at that, and if I may, I would like to ask that that be re-agendized. We may want to amend our comments back to the grand jury. I've got some items I'd like to ask questions about and some things that I think need discussion at the council level. Last item is I had asked a while back, I forget which meeting it was exactly, it may have been the last meeting. In fact, it was the last meeting, to hold off on the minutes for the meeting that was previous, because I had questions about an item that was listed simply as being from closed session, no action was taken. I think I've reviewed that whole item. It has to do with council's review of performance and performance pay, and I would like, if it's necessary, I would like to have that agendized as well for discussion by the council, if necessary, in closed session as much as possible in open session, if we could put that on the agenda as well.
I'm sorry, Matt, what is it that you're asking to get on the agenda?
I'm asking, there was an item that I can't, it's difficult to say too much, Inga, because it has to do with personnel review and pay for performance. But we had something that we met in closed session on, and it was reported from this dais that we met in closed session, no action was taken. And I talked to the city attorney later about that. I felt like we had taken an action. He and I have discussed it back and forth. And I'm simply saying I reviewed all that material sufficiently enough, including material that I requested from Mr. Lanzone, that I have a number of questions, and I think we need to discuss this as a council, if necessary in closed session, if possible in open session.
Okay, I will get with our city attorney, and perhaps you can, he understands what your questions are, is that correct?
He does.
Okay, so,
Well, I can't
Bob and
speak
I-
for him, but
well,
he knows we've talked
Yes,
about
the
it.
issue is whether or not to report out the results of the performance review, not the performance itself, but the results as far as the city manager's bonus. Probably you could clear it up right now tonight when the minutes are on your agenda again, and we could just take care of it then if you care to correct the minutes.
Bob, if I may.
To discuss it, that's
Yeah,
okay.
I actually have questions that not only deal with this situation, but future situations, and also the contract that we had with the city manager.
okay, so I will take this up with Bob and see if this is something we can,
You and I can talk
we can
about
put
it.
in a closed session. Okay, thank
thank
you very
you.
much. Don? Mike, nothing?
On the field committee report, two comments. One, Councilmember Davids continues to bring this disinterested group closer and closer together, and I would second your point about coming forward. But I would also point out that we're going to be looking at financial impact.
Correct.
And so this body needs to be aware of the financial impact that this group is going to recommend. And I think just kind of an early heads up, particularly in our work program for the budget.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a couple of items. First, I'm sure you all received a copy of a letter from David Crabb, architect, regarding Comcast's facility at 281 Crestview. I would just refer this to staff for follow-up, please, and to make sure that's in
Yeah,
action.
we have, through the chair, we do have a copy of that, and we've forwarded it to Comcast. Mr. Crabb has a somewhat unusual circumstance in that the use of that land by Comcast and its predecessor organizations going all the way back to TCI has a condition in it that when they stop using it, it reverts to him. And he's been monitoring this over the last several years. I believe he is correct, as I interpret it, that the land probably does revert to him at this point. But we do have a request into Comcast to see what their position is on this, and then we'll follow up.
Okay. I'd like to request that perhaps staff do some study to see if it's worthwhile for the city to pick it up and be able to lease it to perhaps other agencies as well, maybe for cellular antennas or for, if it's appropriate. I know it's a good high location up
Yeah,
there.
we'll have to research it, but my recollection when I looked at this a couple years ago and Mr. Crabb first brought it up is I believe it automatically reverts to him, if I'm not mistaken. But we'll check it out. We'll check it out.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Next up is, it's come to my attention, actually, there's a rumor going around from a L'Oreal Association's meeting last week, I think it was held last week, where there was some discussion about whether or not the city council was actually in favor or planning to do any straightening to Holly Street. And that was certainly news to me, so I want to just for the record say emphatically that no, we're not making any plans to change anything on Holly Street. In fact, I picked up the phone and called Brian and said, is there something going on that I don't know about? And, Brian, do you want to
Right.
comment?
Yeah, I actually got a similar call from the reporter. I gather it was from some council candidates, and that's the reason, by the way, we have the council candidate orientation later this month to clear up rumors like that before they get out there. But you'll probably recall a number of years ago that we added turn lanes at the beginning and end of that stretch of Holly Street. And at that time, we were told by the traffic engineers that we could capture 60 to 70% of the value of widening the entire street by just adding the turn lanes. And so that was what the city did, and the council at that time then indicated that the council's policy was that we were not planning to widen the balance of the street. And in the many years that I've been here, I've never heard any of the councils I've worked with change that policy. So unless this group or the next group that comes in is planning to change it, I think the policy stands, and certainly that's the staff's position as well.
Well, in order for us to change that policy, it would be obviously a recommendation from staff in several public hearings, and I mean, it's certainly a long
Correct.
public process, so.
Right. There's no such recommendation coming from staff.
Okay, thank you very much. Next on the things I wanted to talk about was actually, I know several of my council members as well as myself have received phone calls and communication from John Hoffman about the library book drop box. And it was my recollection that this council basically said that they were unwilling to move forward even with a study. John has requested that we put on the council agenda actually a formal vote that we don't move forward, and I guess I'd like to just open it up to my council members whether or not they want this back on the agenda or not.
Just a matter of record, Christine, we did review the minute. We didn't vote on it. We just let it drop. All he wants is a vote. And we're talking about the study, not the box. Mm-hmm.
So do we want to have a vote that basically says we do not want to do a study?
If we need to have a vote, we can vote.
Okay.
And maybe we've learned some things since. I don't know. Maybe we've got new insight. But let's vote if that's what's requested. That's
All right.
okay.
Very good. Thank you very much. Two other items. The first is actually I'd like to request our assistant or our interim city manager, Brian Moore, give us an update on South County Fire and that progress. And also just sort of, I know there's been some discussion about whether or not, because Belmont has come up and said maybe we should, reconsider this. Maybe we should look at ways to keep South County Fire. And I believe that, we've got a schedule and a calendar going and have set policy. But Brian, do you want to?
Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. In response to the Mayor's request and also to your Council Subcommittee on Fire Services, I prepared a a brief update for you on where we are on the South County fire question and also on fire services in San Carlos. As you know, since January, we have been working on the question of how to provide fire service to the city of San Carlos. This is after we received the letter from the city of Belmont in December, which dissolved the South County Fire Authority. We've been working with council members King and Eaton as the subcommittee, and also Fire Chief Loudon, who's also acting as our consultant on this project. Where we are since our last meeting, I think you'll recall in August I reported that we have two agencies that have expressed strong interest in providing fire service for San Carlos, that being the cities of San Mateo and the California Department of Forestry. We also have proposals from Redwood City and from the Menlo Fire District. After your last meeting, we met the following morning with the CDF folks, and they continue to express strong interest in providing fire service, and their proposal is based on charging the city on an actual cost per employee basis, and their proposal is significantly under the budget target that we have set. In the case of City of San Mateo, we met with both their fire chief and their city manager the following week. Again, there's strong interest on their part. Their proposal is a little different than the CDF proposal in that rather than based on a per employee cost, it's based on a % share of their department. But again, I think a very viable proposal, a bit more expensive than the other, but I think certainly worth looking into in detail. The key areas that Chief Loudon and I are focusing on in all four of these proposals are the level of fire service provided, providing positions wherever possible for the existing South County Fire Authority staff, and all four proposers have indicated they believe they can provide positions for all of our staff. We think that's important. We are interested in how the agency would work with the City of San Carlos, what's the reporting and management arrangement. We've talked to each of these agencies about a concept I call the managing partner, where the contracting agency would run the fire department and we would have a liaison with them, and everybody seems okay with that concept. And then, of course, cost. Given the general fund situation, we would like to bring the cost of fire services next year down to $4.6 million from the current level of $4.86 million. At this time, we're still waiting word from the other two agencies. It appears that there is interest still in Redwood City, but we have, as of yet, over the last several weeks, been unable to get a meeting going with their city manager and fire chief. We're still trying to do that. In Menlo Park, it's a bit more clouded there. The fire chief who prepared the original proposal to the cities of San Carlos and Belmont has retired, and they have a new interim fire chief who came over from Santa Clara County after he retired. He is reviewing their proposal, and it is not clear at this process whether they will remain in the running or not. Turning to the issue of station closures, the council knows that over the Labor Day weekend we experienced the first full-day station closure in San Carlos at Fire Station 13 on the Alameda. This followed 3 partial day closures in the city of Belmont in weeks prior. Basically what is happening here is because South County Fire's future is in question. We have had a number of retirements. We've also had some workers' comp issues, and as a result, even with having mandatory overtime, we're having coverage issues. The fire chief, since that time, has successfully negotiated a deal with the firefighters union that would enable us to use so-called hourly or per diem paramedics first, and then second, per diem firefighters from the cities of Redwood City and San Mateo. We believe that that's going to allow us to probably avoid future station closures until around Thanksgiving, when holidays kick in, and at that point, because of holiday and vacation schedules, we will probably experience brownouts again. As you probably recall, the original timeline for this project when we started in January was to have a provider picked by June and to have new service by January 1. And in part, the fire chief did that with an attempt to either minimize or avoid brownouts altogether. I think given that we're several months behind that timeline at this point, it is likely, I would suggest, that there will be more brownouts. And as we have done in the past, we will alternate them between the cities of Belmont and San Carlos back and forth. We've talked a lot about keeping the 4 companies together. That's been a stated goal from day one by council members Eaton and King, and I think by the balance of this council as well. And we continue to look at how we might achieve that. There are, of course, challenges. Certainly, one of the challenges is that the City of Belmont's council members have instructed their interim city manager, Mr. Christ, to negotiate separately from the folks in San Carlos. So while this council has not put any of those conditions on me, most instances I am unable to meet with Mr. Christ in the same room with the 4 agencies. It makes it a little difficult to coordinate, but we're trying nevertheless. We've also been told by the City of Belmont that if the 4 companies remain together, they wish for their residents to pay less for fire service than our residents. I don't think that's a reasonable condition. Besides, I would note that in all 4 proposals that we have received, the cost of service being bid is actually on a per station or per company basis. So I'm assuming that each of us will end up paying the same amount of money. There's also an issue in Belmont about the amount of money that the county is paying for the hazmat unit at South County Fire. That has not been an issue in San Carlos, but that is an issue that the City of Belmont has with the county, and has indicated that for South County Fire to continue, that would have to be resolved. And finally, of course, there is the issue that we've had long-standing about the cost of finance and HR services provided by Belmont. The City of San Carlos several years ago submitted a much lower bid for those services, which was not accepted. And so if we had retained the current arrangement, obviously we would want to explore that. I think the key as we look forward is by looking at a contract arrangement. I believe we can jump over those 4 issues and focus our spending in the future on paying for actual fire service versus administrative costs and some of the other issues that we've encountered in the past. In terms of the timeline, we're envisioning that the next step would be to narrow the field to 2 finalists, and I think that is going to primarily be a function of when we can schedule the meetings with Redwood City and Menlo Park. As soon as we have those, I believe we will be able to narrow the field to 2. That could occur as early as your second meeting in September, later this month, and it may occur as late as your second meeting in October. Again, it's a function of when we can get those 2 agencies on the phone. After that, we would envision that the 2 finalists would be given 4 weeks to prepare a detailed proposal and budget for this council's consideration. We believe that the council will want to consider the services offered and the method of provision, and you'll also want to compare costs. In some cases, there are significant differences in those areas. And then we would envision, after that presentation, a selection of a preferred provider for fire services for San Carlos. And again, depending on when the process starts, this could be as early as late October, and it could be as late November. It's somewhere in that time frame. And then we would have Mr. Loudon and I negotiate an agreement for fire services, which we would hope would be signed before the end of the new year. So we envision, as the timeline plays out, that we will probably have some of these actions and decisions coming before the current council and some of them coming before the new council. And finally, in my discussions with the subcommittee last week, they felt it important tonight to not only offer some additional comments, but also to have some discussion among the council about reaffirming the track that we're on. And so I have put that on your agenda tonight, in addition to the update. So I'll turn over to Mr. Eaton and Mr. King for comment, and then any direction that you care to offer, I'd be interested.
Thank you, Brian. Excuse me. We have been in constant communication with you, Councilmember King and myself, and I do believe that it's necessary that we proceed with some reasonable degree of, timeliness in terms of how we provide fire service for our city. I think it's important to realize that we do have some personnel issues because of the retirements, because of the, potential workers' comp sort of issues. We're going to need to take care of that in some form or another, or the consequence of that will be some, effectively, to use the word, brownouts. We'll close down a station for a period of time. I don't think any of us want to do that from a protection standpoint, but we need to move expeditiously to make sure that we accomplish this goal. The other thing to remember is that, with all due respect, governments move slowly. And there's a number of things. This is a highly complex issue. I don't believe that we're going to wait to the last minute. We are in the position that we are only because our friends in the city of Belmont decided to give notice to make South County Fire go away, basically. And we, in a protective mood, not mood, but as a protective action to our own interests as a city, because of what could happen after something else happened, we also gave that notice, only because we had to. We have never been against South County Fire as an entity going away. We have never been against the 4 companies operating in separate fashion in any way, and we've made that perfectly clear. On the other hand, our primary responsibility is to provide a high quality of fire services that the public demands for our citizens and for our businesses, and we're going to continue to do that, but it is a timely process. Just as you've witnessed, Mr. Mora, where certain entities have taken their time, I guess, or they have other things going. I'm not sure what the reason is, but things drag on. It may take a month or two between meetings because people have their own agendas also. We may not be the top thing on their priority list. On the other hand, we think that it is important to move ahead, and the City of Belmont, of course, is an independent entity. They can do whatever they please, and they've demonstrated that in the past by some of the actions that they've taken. We're just trying to do the best that we can that way, and I think we want to keep giving you the support you need, giving Chief Loudon the support that he needs to work with the possible providers and to secure the best service that we can for all of the interests that are involved in that decision ultimately. Mike?
I won't belabor it. We need to stay on the path, and Brian said we started in January. We actually started in July of last year when we hired Chief Loudon, and we hired Chief Loudon, the commission hired him, that's both entities, to find a partner to bring the two together, because as we reported from a budgetary point of view, South County Fire as an entity had 2 years left to exist before the cost line intersected the revenue line. In other words, there would not be enough money to continue. Finally, I think there's this issue of keeping South County Fire together. What we've been talking about is the companies, that is the 4 stations. What we're trying to do is cut the overhead off. And ladies and gentlemen, we are the overhead. I mean, the 2 cities, the commissions, the duplication, there are duplications of the fire chief, the duplication of battalion chiefs, and much of this, the members of the South County Fire who we've been meeting with and who are at these meetings literally every week are in favor for. So when we say keep South County Fire together, we mean the bodies, the 4 stations, the physical premises, and the operations. And it's cut the overhead off where we're going to get the savings. And ultimately, I should point out that the real savings is in the closing of the station. The rest of the stuff will give us a couple of years. So finally, as Don said and Brian pointed out, if it appears we're moving in haste, well, we've been at this thing since July of last year. And we both have attorneys on either side about the disillusionment. We both are meeting regularly with each of the separate parties. But there are some other, as Don said, some very serious issues that have to be resolved, not the least of which is union negotiations, reinstitution of contracts, and this serious issue of shortage of people. These guys are working overtime, and they can't work any more overtime, and our hands are tied on bringing in outside parties. So getting this action to bring in temps is a big issue. And when we say brownout, I think we need to clear the air. The coverage still comes from the nearest station, and many times Redwood City or on the other side, San Mateo is the first call. So though a station may be put down, the coverage is there from the immediate station to either the north or the south. Mm-hmm. So I would urge this body that and I think what Brian's looking for and we're looking for is, do you want us to keep on track, or you want us to stop, or you want us to?
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have one other quick question. Brian, with the dates that you mentioned, I mean, it sounds like, potentially this may extend beyond the November election. And I know Don Eaton and Mike King have been working on this for 18 months or more. I mean, you guys have been on the South County Fire Board as our council representatives for even, forever, Don. I don't know how long forever is, but a really long time. And Mike, the same. I mean, you certainly bring a lot of experience. Is there a way that we as a council might consider being able to allow Mike and Don to continue to work on this, even though they're not on city council necessarily for some defined period of time?
Let me comment on that, and I'll also let the city attorney comment as well. After the mayor asked me this question the other day, we did research it, and I think the answer is that Mr. King and Eaton certainly can continue on as a advisory committee, but as far as being on the actual fire board, it has to be an elected council member. Is that somewhat correct? That's correct.
Yeah, that's understandable. But in terms of actually coming back to the council or working with Chuck and making the recommendation, I just would say to, well, Tom, you're going to be on council with me because our terms aren't up yet, but that may be something that we and whoever gets elected in November, if indeed.
I'd be more than
you guys
happy
would
to
be-
work, but it'd be strictly an advisory capacity.
Absolutely, no, I understand
But
that.
the decision has to come to this body, and whoever is here,
Right.
and whatever it happens. But, I mean, to cut through all the, what great contribution we make. I mean, the work's being done by Chuck Loudon and the staff and the daily meetings that are going, well, not daily, well, almost daily meetings that are going on. So to the extent that we may or may not add, to that party, the real guts of this work is done by Chief Loudon. And the best thing we could do, in my humble opinion, is to stand behind him and say, that's what we hired you to do. Stick with it. Let the fire professionals make the decision. And indeed, maybe what we're talking about is cutting off some of the overhead, which, as I said, is right here, is us.
Yeah.
Well, that's certainly something I think we can just consider at a future, if that indeed.
Yeah, Inga, Mike and I, while we've been involved for a long time and listening to Mike, and I'm certainly also happy to help the council in whatever way we can, whether we're officially elected people or not. We want the best things for San Carlos regardless, so we'd be happy to help.
Great. And then, Brian, I had one other question, if it's all right, Matt. Was there any negative impact out of the brownout of the station or anything?
We didn't experience any problems. As Councilmember King indicated, we had coverage, backup coverage. And the other thing I would indicate as well is this is not something that's unique to San Carlos and Belmont. The cities of Redwood City and San Mateo and some of the other agencies around the county are also browning out stations to deal with their general fund problems. So this is not maybe somewhat unique to us, but is not unique around the county. And in those situations as well, mutual aid covers.
And an editorial comment, this is why we need to consolidate.
Yeah, well, the brownouts actually didn't occur because of it was a city planned brownout in order to save money. It was really more a lack of staffing.
That's exactly right, Mayor. What happened was we had worked the individuals over their mandatory overtime limit, and that coupled with the holidays we had to give them, we just ran out of staff.
Okay, all right. Well, it's nice to hear that you guys are working on a solution. Now, Matt, did you have questions?
I had a couple of questions. First one regarding the brownout, the drop in staff. Has there been a drop in staff since a certain time period recently, or?
It's been over the last several months. Part of it is due to retirements. Part of it is due to people going out in workers' comp. And I think part of it is just due to the fact that the South County Fire is being wrapped up. And so there's not a whole lot of interest, as you might imagine, in people joining an organization that may be going out of business, so to speak.
Now, I have a question regarding, I had a conversation with you, Brian, on the phone, because as you know, I called you and said, from the last time you reported this, it does seem to me like there's a bit of a hurry-up mode, and I think that's perhaps a result of this becoming a campaign issue. When I talked with you, and I, to be fair, I said to you, you've got to do your job, you've been given direction, and you're doing what you need to do, but the specific question I asked you was, will there be the opportunity for a new council, whatever the makeup of that new council is, to take on this decision? And at the time, you assured me that you believed there would not be a final decision, at least until December, and yes, the new council could take it on.
And to
What's
clarify,
changed?
right, and to clarify, Councilmember Grocott, I still think that's the case. I think the final decision on an agreement with an agency to provide fire service will probably not occur until either the second meeting in November or meeting in December, which is when the new council will be seated, as far as I know.
Okay, and I just want folks to know, I want this council to know that when we met as all 5 candidates, or all 6 candidates, excuse me, when we met with the unions, they invited us to the union hall, whether it's AFSCME or the San Mateo County or South County Fire was there, and all the other unions that represent our employees. This was a major question, and each of the candidates were required from South County Fire to answer questions about the situation, and every candidate commented that in one fashion or another they would like the opportunity to be involved in discussions about South County Fire and the possibility of keeping it together. So I would just note that and take that under advisement.
Yeah, and I guess I'd make a couple comments. One is, again, the final decision is likely to occur on the watch of the new council. Second, and going back to my earlier comments, if the new council wishes to try to keep South County Fire together, they do have to deal with the 4 issues that I talked about earlier, namely the separate negotiations, Belmont's desire that if South County Fire continues to exist, that they want to pay less for fire services than San Carlos, that they want the county to pay more for hazardous material services, and that there is an issue about how much they charge for overhead, which gets to Councilmember King's point about, are we paying for overhead, or are we paying for fire service? So, you know, anything is possible, I guess I would say, but on the other hand,
Presenting those things as mandates or items for discussion?
I guess what I'm saying is that over the last, I don't know how many years, and Mr. King and Eaton could correct me if, you know, as far as how long you think that's been going on, those are the issues that the City of Belmont has presented to our city as things that we-
Again, as mandates or as
Yeah,
items for discussion?
Yeah, exactly, as things that they have as conditions for continuing on with South County Fire.
Yeah, okay.
I might add, Matt, that only one of those is effectual to this body. The other 3 are outside of the area of our
Sure.
purvey.
Yeah, well, if this were to go forward, I mean, if South County Fire were to stay together, we certainly would have to consider changing the governing structure at a minimum, because you can't have, I mean, 2 council members from each city.
Right.
It's a 2-to-2 vote.
I think what you
and
have to
that's a
have,
problem.
Inga, is you have to understand people have different definitions of keeping South County Fire together. What the fire persons want is the 4 companies to remain.
So operationally,
Right.
keeping them
And
together.
that's everybody's objective. What we're saying is to keep South County together in its current structure with 2 cities, each paying 50%, each having an overhead. That's what we're trying to eliminate.
Right.
And right now, actually, I mean, if we decouple the financial side of it from the operational side, essentially, because all of the, I mean, we have the fire response throughout the county is done through mutual aid, right? Where they cover for each other. So operationally, they're all working together as it is already. And so what we're really talking about is whether or not it makes sense financially to keep the entity, the financial entity, together or not.
Correct.
Rather
Well-
than the operational entity.
Well, I think that's exactly right, Mayor, and I think really part of the question is we, you know, as a city and ultimately the council is going to have to decide what is the most important. Is it to keep the 4 companies together, or is it to keep the entity together? And obviously, one of the drawbacks of keeping the entity together is part of what we end up paying is the overhead, which Mr. King talked about, that if
Then
you...
I have another question.
Go ahead.
If we're talking about keeping the companies together, how many of those people in that company do you think will stay if we were to elect a CDF as our
Well,
candidate?
actually, one of the individuals at South County Fire has a job offer from CDF, and he was asking me, you know, what
That
was the
wasn't my
timeline.
question.
Well,
You're
you know
talking
what?
about one person. Well, we're talking about this,
Matt,
Inga, so
it's-
things are being brought up
that's
and said as though they are
hypothetical.
factual, and they are not factual.
I think it's a hypothetical question. This is an update, and we're waiting to get, obviously, a recommendation from Brian. It seems to me that you may be raising issues that may not be issues at this time. So
Really?
we'll wait for further updates from Brian. But again, Brian's asking for general information to stay the course in terms of the dates and the activities that he described. And it sounds like from 2 of my council members, you're comfortable with the timeline and the activities. Tom?
I would steer the course from what little I know about the process. I certainly have heard about it for a long time, and I understand, I think, where you're headed. Responding to Matt in a way, the idea of trying to hold this together, it seems to me to be almost a moot point. I think it's been trying that for a long time. It may be possible, but I just don't see it. So I think there is going to be a separation, not to prejudge the process, but it does look to me as though we're headed that direction. Unless something miraculously turns it around fairly quickly, we'll be so far down the road that there's no way to save it. So if anyone has a magic on how to save this thing, now would be the time to step forward and get it done. I did have a question, though, in terms of process, in terms of people. Being a firefighter is a very attractive position for some people, a career path. And is it that we don't want to hire new people? Let's talk about the rookie class, just to fill the billet and, get guys on the truck. We don't want to do that. We can't do it. What's our process in trying to fill these jobs?
I think at this point, Chuck Loudon's feeling is that we're so close to wrapping it up that it really doesn't make sense to launch a multi-month recruitment. However, we have told all 4 agencies that whoever gets the agreement with the 2 cities is going to be in what we call hiring mode. That is, they're going to be hiring new firefighters to do the coverage. And part of what we've been trying to do as we've met with the 4 is make sure that those existing people that we have, the seasoned professionals who are still at South County Fire, get integrated into a fire service that serves San Carlos and Belmont. And we believe that that's going to be achievable. I mean, the 4 agencies have all said they're very interested in retaining the South County Fire staff and the equipment we have and the stations and all of that. They have not indicated any concern. I guess the other comment I would make, too, as far as process, is that I would remind everybody that one of Chief Loudon's conditions for staying is that we continue to make progress. Right. And that was one of the reasons at my last update I used that expression, is I think we want to make it real clear to the Chief that we are making progress, because he has indicated that his 1-year agreement is up at the end of this month, and that after that, if we don't make progress, he may not stay. So that's something we have to keep in mind as well.
So bottom line, I would steer the course and carry the process forward.
Okay, Matt?
As I said to Brian in the conversation I had with him on the phone, I don't mind him doing his job. He knows, you all know, this has become a campaign issue. All the candidates are talking about it. People are talking about it. And I think if we rush forward and try to get this done before an election takes place to stifle any process there that may happen with a new council, I think that would be a disservice to really the democratic process and what's going on right now, this season that we're in.
Okay, well, I didn't necessarily hear anything that indicated to me that that's what staff was trying to do, but
No. And again, I think unless I'm missing something, I don't think it's possible to finish it before
I don't
the
either.
council
At the
is.
pace this thing goes.
It's not gonna
Okay.
Hold on a second. I heard you say, you're saying 2 things, Brian, because at one point you said timeline. Depends on schedule of meetings, could be as early as our next September meeting, and then after that you've got 4 weeks to get a proposal together and make a choice. Did I hear something incorrectly there?
What I said was there were 5 steps in the process, and that the 5th step would occur in December, which means that no matter how you slice it, the new council is going to be sitting there in December, unless I missed something.
I heard that too.
Yeah. I mean, what I said was there was a mixture, there may be a mixture. That is, this council may narrow the field from 4 to 2, yes.
And that's what happens in hopefully a month to 6 weeks.
Yeah, a month to 6 weeks, depending. But that the discussion about which is the preferred company may happen on this council's watch, may happen on the next council's watch. But the actual final agreement and the actual signature of the agreement is clearly going to happen with the new council.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't imagine a scenario where we would move so quickly that it wouldn't.
Okay.
And again, in
Well, thank you for clarifying.
yeah.
Okay, the last item under council reports, longest council reports session ever, is,
We just set a record for council report time, I think.
I think so too, is a consideration of canceling our October 10th meeting in favor of enhancing the city of good living. Use that time slot as a community building study session. We've been having some trouble getting schedules together and looking out into, with my mayoral crystal ball, that meeting is actually at this point fairly free of agenda items. We may have a couple of consent calendar items that are routine, but overall what I'd like to do is to use that time instead to have a public meeting that's part of the building, or sustaining San Carlos, or whatever we're calling it these days, enhancing the city of good living. Is there, people agree with that?
Just a clarification.
Yeah.
We talked about doing it October 11. and that
Well,
didn't
actually,
work out.
I think well, Matt couldn't do it on the 11th.
Okay.
And, rather than continue to push this out and try to find a date, I just thought, we've all got October 10th on our calendar anyway. We've got television cameras. We have the public
I'm with
sitting
you.
there waiting with bated breath to see what this council's going to do.
I'm with you.
So I thought it would be a nice idea to give them something interesting to watch for a change.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I guess one comment I would make through the chair is that we may have some consent items that evening, so we may, even if you're going to, the majority of the meeting be sort of a study session, you still may want to have a consent calendar that night.
Yeah, we may do that, depending on that.
Turn it back on.
Yeah.
I have a question for you because you sort of commented on the, whatever we're calling this. It was your idea from the beginning for this. Do you have a preference? Because for myself, I have a preference that we at least hone in on one thing and let's call it that and let's move forward with that.
And not
title
visioning.
from on.
Not visioning,
Not
Matt?
not envisioning, not vision.
So that and I just say that because
Yeah,
it's getting a
absolutely.
little confusing. Every time we put it on the agenda or something like that, it's got a new title. So let's settle down on something and go for it.
Okay, something that's easy to remember. Jeff Maltby's in the audience. Come up with an acronym, please. All right. Next item tonight, public comment. This is a period of time limited to 10 minutes. I have speaker slips from 5 individuals. If you could, please limit your comments to 2 minutes or less. And the public comment period is actually for items not on the posted agenda. And if there are, well, I guess there's not more than 5, so I don't have to worry about that. So first up, Clint Miller, followed by Barb Patterson, Julie Sherrod, Drew Schell, and then Heidi Skrenta. Uh-oh, now I have 6, so that one's going to the end.
Gee, Horst, that usually happens to me. Anyway, I appreciate the courtesy. I did try to speak about this last time, so I do appreciate the courtesy of going first here. I would like to talk for just a brief period about the letter that the city wrote to the Superior Court Judge Norman Gazzard. I found some troubling inaccuracies in the letter. I'd like to just quickly touch on these. The letter asserted that with regard to the contractors that have been so controversial, that there were no contract employees. The grand jury, essentially the city was saying that the grand jury was misstating the case. Actually, the city's letter is cleverly constructed and artificially limited to a 12-month period of the current grand jury's session. And of course, we all know that the contractors in question became contractors in 2001. However, what I find troubling about this logic is that by trying to limit the time period to 12 months of the current grand jury's session, the grand jury that's making the criticism, you are ignoring the fact that the current letter refers back to the previous grand jury of 2004 when this was an issue. So this is artificial, it is false, and it's untrue. Second item, it was asserted that the district attorney dismissed without merit the charge that a Section 1090 violation occurred when these contractors signed their contracts. In fact, that's not true at all. What the district attorney found was that there was a technical violation of Section 1090, but that the district attorney determined that he didn't think he would be able to get a jury to convict because, one, the contractors had received poor legal advice from both the city attorney and the city manager. So by saying that this did not occur, that's untrue. Finally,
Sorry, Clint, your time's up, so if you could just
all right,
wrap up, that would be
very
great.
quickly. Okay, awarding of contracts. No contracts were awarded. This, of course, is also false. The 12-month limitation occurs here also. Contracts, public funds are expended on projects that come before this body. And if you would like to document this, I brought up the White Oaks flood control project. You claim no knowledge of that. If you would like to review the videotape of the August 23rd, 2004 meeting, you will see yourself asking Parviz Mukhtari if he was going to make money on that project. He did, in fact, said he would make money. Later in that same meeting, when the El Camino median project came up, I got up and asked him, And yes, he's going to make money on that too. $13,000 in one night. Let me conclude. Contracting seems to be the issue here. You ignore that.
Okay, Clint, I'm sorry.
There is a fundamental part of the democratic process that a government has a contract with the public to conduct the public's business in a fair, open, transparent manner. You people do not do this.
Okay. Barb Patterson, please. Followed by Julie Scherer, Drew Shell, and then Heidi.
Good evening. I'm Barbara Patterson, and I live in San Carlos. And I'm like Barbara OneNote because I always come with the same theme. I'm involved in the creeks and the seasonal activities right now would be the winter preparation, so that everyone who lives on the creeks, we're inviting them to get involved in getting their creek area clean, so when the rains come, all the debris will not be going into the bay. This fulfills part of the city's obligation under our stormwater prevention, et cetera, program to make sure that we don't have a lot of really dirty runoff going into the creeks. And I've talked with Ms. Cullinan about the city's involvement with the community in the creek cleanups. I think the city is going to be putting out a letter, which I think is terrific, as was done last year. Otherwise, we're having brownie troops and high school groups and others go out and clean up the various 4 creeks we have. So it should be a really good effort. I handed out something to you today, which I thought was very exciting. I don't know if you share my excitement, but it's called Stream Relief. And I'd like to just read a couple of the lines in it. It's called, "In the past, location near water made cities and towns grow. As we grew, we altered our riverfronts and stream banks, replacing trees with buildings, lawns, and cropland. But just as people depend on water, rivers depend on woodlands. The streamside forest buffers help filter the runoff of sediments and the fertilizers we apply to our lawns and crops. They assist with the nutrient uptake, provide canopy and shade for temperate control, and provide habitat and leaf food for the aquatic life. They're important in urban, agricultural, etc., and other settings." Now, this program, we're having a little trouble just kind of getting a hand on the management of our creeks in our town. This is the entire state of Pennsylvania. They have a whole effort to regreen their creeks. This is called Stream Relief, Replanting Pennsylvania Stream Sides. This is a real commitment, I would say. They have thousands of seedlings being grown. They have community groups in every watershed they have, and they have a phased program to get the streams regreened. We have a group in our town called San Carlos Relief. Debbie Kramer and Angela Mallett founded that.
Yeah, your time's just about up.
Yeah, and the issue there is that we would want to work toward replanting and regreening our creeks. Along that line, an applicable situation that's in the process now is the Devonshire Canyon project, where the city's entertaining pretty much destroying an upper watershed by putting 5 homes indiscriminately right above the creek bed. And I think this is something that we want to bring to your attention. And just maybe we could think about what Pennsylvania's doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Julie Scherer, followed by Drew Shell.
Good evening. I'm Julie Scheer, and I'm a resident of San Carlos. And I would just like to also share my concerns about the Winding Way annexation and the impact it will have on our environment and on our community. And I'd like to yield the rest of my time to Drew Shell.
Hello, I'm Drew Shell, 153 Palm Avenue, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the California Native Plant Society. I have copies of my statement here also for you. I'll pass those out afterwards. CNPS has a strong interest in the Winding Way site and will later submit detailed comments on the project proposal, but I want to emphasize now the very special opportunity before you regarding this project. RQ8 bush mallow, the rare plant that occurs at the project site, is only known from 3 counties in California, and the California Department of Fish and Game's rare plant database has only 23 records of the plant. Of those, 14 are anecdotal ranging from about 45 to over 100 years old. Exact locations and original population sizes are unknown, and no contemporary confirmations exist. One record is questionable, giving a location outside the typical range of the plant and in a region where other bush mallow species are more likely to occur. 2 records are from Montera Mountain. The most recent was unable to find any of the previously reported plants. The remaining records, plus 1 undocumented sighting near Crystal Springs, constitute just 7 current locations of this plant known to CNPS. Of these, 1 consists of 6 plants, and 4 others of 3 or fewer plants. The remaining 2 locations are the only known sizable populations of arcuate bush mallow. One is at Edgewood County Park, whose population has varied over the years, dipping as low as 5 plants in 1992. The other is the Winding Way site, where 14 plants were observed in 2004. Clearly, arcuate bush mallow is very rare. If it is to survive, preservation of the Winding Way population is of great importance, which brings us to the opportunity I mentioned earlier. This unique plant is part of the natural heritage handed down to us from generations past, and you now have the opportunity to help ensure it will not be lost to future generations. To seize this opportunity, all you need do is enforce the San Carlos policies already on the books, which clearly indicate that Winding Way annexation and development should not be allowed to proceed. I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Last up during this public comment period is Heidi Skrenta.
Hi, I'm Heidi Skrenta, and I live in San Carlos, and I'm also taking this opportunity to speak about the Winding Way proposed development. There's a focused EIR in review right now, and this is the last week to make any public comments on it, so that's why I'm speaking to you. I've written a letter to the senior planner, which I'm going to send this week, and I've also given you copies of the letter. So I'm not going to read the whole letter because I know you're pressed for time. But I just want to stress that one of the things I noticed that's been missing from the EIR and the negative deck is the implications of developing the portions of Winding Way that aren't actually going around the developer's property. All the maps just show the developer's property and the road going by, but there's also a portion of the road that goes from there down to Chesham, which actually goes by my backyard. And I've gone out there to measure how wide the existing road is, which is bordered on one side by a retaining wall going into a mountain, and on the other side by a steep drop-off into the creek. It's only 19 to 20 feet wide, and they're talking about having a road of 22 to 24 feet wide. So there's going to have to be some major work to accomplish that. I haven't seen anything about it, and I'm obviously concerned since it's right behind my home. The other thing is that I'm aware that there have been some groups, the Devonshire Canyon Open Space Alliance, Friends of Cordilleras Creek, and the California Native Plant Society, which have expressed interest in trying to purchase this land and ultimately turn it into a park for preservation of plants and also for the use of people in the neighborhood as recreation and people from all of San Carlos, since it is accessible. And I just wish that there was a group in the city or somebody in the city government that could be an advocate for people trying to turn land into parks as much as there is for people trying to develop land for residential and commercial purposes. So that's just something that I'd like to bring up and I'd like you to consider. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, next item on our agenda this evening is the approval of the consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine in nature. I know. It's stated in the agenda that it's limited to 5 speakers, so we're out of time. There is a public comment period at the end. Absolutely, I have it here. So consent calendar items are considered to be routine in nature and will be enacted by one motion. There'll be no separate discussion unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. And I would like to state also for the record that we all did receive a letter from Granite Rock dated September 9th that I think pertains to item 6E, but just for the record that we did receive that as well. So for my council members, anyone wish to remove any items? Staff
No, Madam Mayor.
and the public? Barbara? I know. E and F. Okay, Matt? Okay. 6B, as in boy? Okay. All right, so is there a motion to approve items 6A, C, D, G, H, and I?
Madam Mayor, I'd move approval of those consent calendar items A, C, D, G, H, and I.
Moved by Councilmember Eden, seconded by Councilmember King. Christine?
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember King? Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott? Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes. Item 6B.
Michael Galvin, City Treasurer. I request that you would adjust the warrant approval to exclude checks 6420 and 6469 totaling $67,853. I understand one check has been voided and the other is awaiting additional information.
Okay, so that's, again, checks 6420 and 6469?
Correct.
Okay. Is that,
I think Rich is here and he could
that's it?
affirm.
He's nodding his head. Okay. So unless there's further discussion, is there a motion to approve the warrant list expenditures with the exception of check number 6420 and 6469?
So moved.
Again, moved and seconded. Christine?
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember King?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes. Okay, 6E, which is the resolution awarding the contract for the slurry seal project of 2005.
Good evening. My name is Don Barrett. I'm with Granite Rock. I'm here to ask the City Council to reject all bids and rebid the city slurry seal project without the restriction that the slurry aggregate be volcanic in origin, black in color. Bruce Wolpert and I have sent letters to you and city staff on this matter, including letters before bids were submitted. The city has adopted a specification in which there's only one supplier of the slurry aggregate. That black aggregate supplier's price is considerably higher than proven more local sources. This results in considerably higher road maintenance costs for the city. For example, recently the city of Los Altos bid their slurry seal project. The premium would have been 22.5% or $65,000 for the ad alternate of black aggregate. The city of San Jose, the premium for black aggregate in their project would have been 19% or $98,000. Both of these cities rejected black aggregate and adopted instead the Caltrans standard specification. The city of Redwood City bid their slurry seal project on September 7th. The cost to substitute black aggregate in the place of Caltrans standard specification would be $62,500 or a 28% increase on their bid project. Or said another way, for the same cost, they'll be able to maintain 28% more streets for the same price. Contrary to staff assertions that a number of other local agencies have adopted the black aggregate specification, the fact is the city of San Jose changed their base bid specification to standard Caltrans and awarded it that way, as did the town of Los Altos. Additionally, Santa Clara County is just using standard Caltrans specification. Menlo Park has directed Public Works staff to conduct an objective review of its specifications prior to any further bids. Staff also alleged citizen complaints about the color of streets, and this just doesn't make sense. The color of your streets, the parent aggregate of the hot mix asphalt or asphaltic concrete used in your streets, is gray, made from the local hot plants. So as that, the streets where you get the color of that parent aggregate, which is a gray. If you do your slurries with a gray aggregate within the slurry, yes, that material does polish off or begin to wear, the emulsion does, and you see the parent aggregate of the parent color of the aggregate, which is gray. However, it is a lighter color, and lighter color pavements are cooler, which is a well-known fact that they perform better because the asphalt or emulsion does not age as quickly. We've seen no technical support for the position that dark-colored aggregates perform better. We ask that you rebid your project, which can be done quickly, saving the city money and putting the city on the right course for the future. We recommend that you rebid it to maintain your streets in the most cost-efficient way. We do have a second speaker here tonight. We'd like to reserve his time, if possible, for any additional comments or questions that staff may have.
Okay, were you aware that actually we're getting the black aggregate from our supplier at the same cost as a gray color aggregate?
I saw that letter. I don't know if that means that, looking at that bid price, that you are actually realizing the total savings cost. Staff estimated in their letter to you a savings of 8%. I detailed 3 local cities, including one that bid just last week, that are showing a 28% savings. So I don't know if that is, in fact, the savings that you're realizing. The only way to know that for sure would be to rebid your project with either a standard Caltrans specification or, as Redwood City did, with a standard Caltrans specification with an add alternate for the black aggregate, so you can see a true cost differential.
Okay, Parviz, do you have anything that you wanted to add to this? Parviz Mokhtari, our Public Works Director.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The difference that I indicated in the memo, that is approximately 8%, it is in my tonight's memo as well. The difference in the slurry seal item between the low bidder and the second bidder, you have it, the difference is 7.48%, and the low bidder bid was based on gray. So that's where I arrived at approximately 8%. And as you know, American Asphalt has indicated that their bids was based on gray, but they will honor their bid and supply black. Regarding Redwood City, actually, if you have the copy of the letter from Granite, on page 2, one contractor submitted a bid. The difference between gray and black is $1,500 on the $400,000 project. One contractor put the difference at $62,000. And however, talking to Redwood City classified all these bids as non-responsive, and they're not going to award contract because of that. They're going to wait till next year. So the difference is not the $62,000. We can say the difference is only $1,500, which is on the second page of Redwood City's bid summary. I will still recommend that you award the contract to American Asphalt.
Excuse me, Parviz, where are you finding this 8% or something?
Oh, the 8% in my memo?
Which memo? You gave us 3.
No, when I indicated, excuse me.
What I mean by that, Parviz, is you've given us the memo for tonight.
The staff report.
Staff report. You've
Right.
given us
At the bottom, the last
memo
paragraph.
dated June 27th.
Which was the other staff report.
I know. You've given us a memo dated August 19th. I see, and this is also dated August 19th. The second one I have, another copy. So anyways, go ahead. Where are you?
Yeah, the memo dated September 8th, which recommending award of contract tonight.
September 8th.
The last paragraph on the first page.
Right here.
The difference between American Asphalt slurry that was based on gray.
Sure, okay.
And the Valley slurry that was based on black.
Yeah.
The difference between those two is 7.46%.
I have a question then. If I take any of the other numbers, which were all based on black, the other 3, and apply the, let's say, let's low ball it a little bit, let's say 15% to, if I'm looking at the letter from Granite Rock, they're talking about 20 to 23% savings. So let's say it's even 15% savings, whatever. If I apply that kind of savings to any of the other 3 numbers, in fact, when I apply it to the highest number from California Pavement, then we might expect $438,000, a bid of $438,000 if we had no color specified.
No, the numbers you're looking at, it's not the slurry seal. You're looking
looking
at that's the total contract, involves a lot of other items. That's why I compared the slurry seal cost of the 2 low bidders. If you go back, I don't have those items, the $547,000, that's all of it is not the slurry cost. It's a lot of different other items. If you look at the valley, for example, American Asphalt slurry is 277, total contracts is 448, almost double. It's because of there are a lot of other items in the contract besides slurry.
Okay, and the other question I had was, actually, I had a bunch of questions I had sent you in a memo, and I didn't get any response to them. But the amount that American Asphalt is asking for in, here it is, American Asphalt requests the city cover our direct emulsion cost increase for this project at time of installation. And from my understanding from talking to some different people in this business, it's not just that the price has gone up because it's a petroleum-based product, but also because black aggregate, volcanic rock, requires more of the emulsion to hold the final product together. Is that not true?
That is not true, but the American Asphalt is asking for, and this is happening in the industry, asphalt plants do not quote prices for next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks from now because of uncertainties, of course. So, and there's a provision in Caltrans specification as well. You can't make the contractor come and lose money. If what they're saying, the time to bid the contract, they will submit a statement from the supplier for the price of emulsion and the time they want to apply it and bring it. The supplier will give them in the statement how much the price is now, and we have to honor that.
Okay. Since we don't know how much that's going to be, and this gentleman said we could put out these bids in 2 days, or put out a new bid in 2 days and get an answer back, then we'd know exactly how much we're paying, and everybody's bidding the same thing if we go with a no-color bid.
This gentleman obviously doesn't know public contracting laws. If you reject these bids, the earliest we can go out to bid will be next March or April because weather condition is not good for.
All you have to do is no, I've been in this kind of business before, not this particular business, but I've been in the business where you do bids and you amend things, and at least with architects, you can turn these things out in a couple of days.
This is not architecture and this is not private work.
But what's changing? There's nothing in the specification that would change except turning it into a no-color.
We have to put it out to bid. We have to give contractors 2-3 weeks to submit bids. By the time it comes in, it comes back to City Council that at least a month, and I would not recommend.
If you do it as an addendum, excuse me, if you do it as an addendum.
This is not an addendum. Bid opening is done. After the bid opening, you don't issue addendum.
Matt, this
Oh,
isn't
that's right,
private
and I
sector.
asked for that before we went forward with this procedure. I called the city manager and I said, why can't we hold off on taking in the bids, do an amendment to the specification, and get this thing out as a Caltrans no-color specification? And he said, oh, no, the best thing to do is let this go forward. You're right, we can't do that.
Right.
I think the bigger issue here, to my fellow council members, is whether or not we're wanting to go along with the recommendation of our Public Works Director and what he's provided a memo to us and move forward, or that we're going to push or allow a contractor, Granite Rock, who obviously is a little bit pushed out of shape because they're not allowed to bid on this project. That's what it sounds like. Try to ask us to change our minds about what we want to have happen here within San Carlos. I actually, since this has come up, have spent a lot of time staring at roads as I'm driving around, and you know what, Parviz, I happen to agree with you. I like the black ones better than the gray ones, and I think that they, from the public perception, they look nicer. They look like they're newer, longer, rather than sort of older and faded and all of that. So I would sort of put this to the question of my fellow council members, you know, is this something that that we want to move forward with or not? This isn't a public hearing.
I didn't know you'd
This is actually council discussion.
Actually, one of the member of the public that raised her hand is the member of the public that pulled this off the consent calendar, I believe, and asked to have it discussed.
Absolutely, and she's more than welcome to come up if she's got questions.
Okay.
Don?
Madam Mayor, I tend to have long experience with the high-quality work of our Public Works Director, and I approve of his judgment, and I read his memos. I happen to like the darker roads, too, because they do look nicer, longer. I think that is a public perception sort of item, especially given the cost considerations that he's been able to negotiate. I would move approval of consent calendar item number 6E.
Okay, is there other discussion?
Well, I'd second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded.
I want to add a comment before we vote on this.
Well, we have some.
Yeah, we're going to continue. Yeah, Barbara? I'm sorry, you need to come up to the microphone.
Public comment before you vote or after?
No, now's the time, because
Okay.
there's been a motion and a second.
Okay. The reason I asked for some discussion on this is that I've looked at a lot of the streets, and I was concerned about who the contractors were who would be doing the work. And I don't see too much of a write-up on this. I don't know how you're making a decision here. I guess you have some paperwork on this that's not available?
Actually, Parvez can describe to you the process in terms of low bid and the way that these contracts are awarded.
How many contractors were bidding and all that?
Parvez, do you want to provide some quick answers?
Yeah, the process is we prepare the specifications and we advertise it within the local papers and trade publications, and the contractors in this type of business pick up plans and specifications, and they calculate and submit their proposals. And then when proposals come in, usually bids are awarded to the lowest responsible contractor. This time, I think we had 4.
4, okay.
Right.
Well, my question has to do with the timing also. And I don't know that anyone who's done work here before ought to continue doing work, mainly because in going through the streets, you can see the layers, a couple inches of, more asphalt, another layer of asphalt, another layer of asphalt. And I don't think this has been done very well. In a lot of places, it's pretty much a hazard where you'll have a big bump off, and then the drainage area, and then the curb starts. But I don't know. I think there ought to be more review of whoever's doing the actual work, or better supervision. The other point is I'm wondering about the timing, because I'm sure there's a lot of, I don't know what it's called, residual or something like that would be taken into the creeks as runoff when the rainwaters come. And I'm wondering if it might be better to do this in the spring after the rain, so that we have the whole summertime for the street cleaning and a lot of other things to happen. It's a question I'd like an answer to that, but I don't really think the way we've done it before is really very good. I think it deteriorates the streets rather than enhances them and makes them safe. In fact, I ride a little motor scooter, and during the rainy season, I was going through the alley, which you want to eliminate, and there was chunks. I mean, we're talking 2-inch chunks by maybe a foot of concrete that had been carried away by the water, and this was I just dumped my bike and I hurt myself. And so I mean, these things happen that these chunks just wear away. So I don't know if it's the way it's being installed, if it's a material, or what.
Parvez, do you have any answer for that in terms of just standard street maintenance? Because this comes up, we do this every single year.
Yes, actually, and we get a lot of emails. There are potholes here and there, of course, and from the residents and inspectors look at them and go, repair them, but it's possible there's a pothole that we hadn't seen, and someone drives over. But I hope everybody will report it to us so we can take care of it. As far as the timing of the slurry seal process goes very fast. And as you know, we awarded a contract for patching the streets. Contractors on the job, they're repairing the failed areas, and we hope to have the slurry contractor right behind him and seal the streets, crack seal and seal the streets. And all of this work should be completed early November before any rain. And the slurry cures in just a couple of hours, so there's no runoff even if it rains.
Okay, thank you very much.
My name is Bruce Wolpert. I'm president of CEO of Granite Rock Company. And I think the first thing I'd like to say is Granite Rock is 105 years old. It was started by my grandfather, and never have we been pushed out of shape because we were not allowed to bid something. We are a technical company, and we're making a valid technical argument here. You as a city council can decide to spend extra money on black color, but you should know three things. First, black color does not last longer, it lasts shorter. Number two, the effectiveness of headlights is less. And number three, the effectiveness of streetlights is less. It's common sense. Black color absorbs light, it does not reflect light. I don't understand why this city wants to spend more money and make its streets less safe. Our argument is consistent with the California state specification. It's not Granite Rock's argument, it's the California state specification argument. Why is it more money? There is a single source of this material. They charge more for it. They are a monopoly. It's clear. That doesn't make me happy, I can tell you that. They're also 130 miles away. 130 miles away, farther than the other sources. Now, that $1,500 that your public works manager pointed out to you, it would be $1 more per ton. In other words, that supplier who owns that quarry and is also a contractor is basically saying, I can transport aggregate 130 miles for $1. It is not possible. The reason we're here tonight is we think that you're on the wrong course. And we're here for technical reasons. And I'd like to have you listen to us on that basis, because that's why we're here. I think you're wasting the city's money. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. There's still a motion. Do you want to continue with the motion, Don?
Motion still stands.
Second still? Okay. Christine, would you call the question, please?
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember King?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes. Okay, next item on consent calendar this evening is item 6F as in Frank. It's a resolution awarding the contract for the Bike Route Improvement Project 2005. Again, Barbara, you were the ones that pulled this one. Do you want to pop up here and let us know what questions you had about it?
Well, I remember when the Scoot situation of the voting failed, the motion failed to finance Scoot, and I remember Mr. Parviz or Mr. Mokhtari was interviewed by the newspaper, and maybe he was misquoted, but he said then he'd have a couple $100,000 to create bike trail, the bike paths. And I'm thinking, why don't we save that money for our future transportation issues if we have another Scoot? I mean, the money could be sitting there and interest could be created on it, and instead of taking a couple $100,000 and striping the streets for bikes. That's my issue.
Okay. Parviz, do you want to give us like a 3-second rundown of our BPAC committee and where this came from?
This project is funded by the state and federal grants. These are the state and federal grants that are set aside for bike lanes, and some are for pedestrians only and cannot be used for anything else.
So these are essentially, if we didn't use the funds on this, we wouldn't get the funds and we couldn't use them for any other
Correct.
purpose?
Correct.
Okay. So, Ms. Patterson, does that answer your question? Well, that's our Public Works Director, trust me, I believe, knows where the money is coming from and knows what he can spend it on.
I would recommend that you go to MTC website and you. This project costs $56,000.
$9,000.
$60,000.
She needs to come to the microphone.
Yeah, I mean, if you have additional questions, you'll need to come to the microphone. Oh, okay. Further questions? If anyone else has other questions?
I'll move item 6F.
Second.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded. Christine?
Councilmember King?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes. Okay, next item on our agenda, 7A. These are public hearings, these next three items. First is a consideration of abandonment of a portion of a 6-foot wide easement across the lands of Wellman at 16 Coronado Avenue. For the benefit of the audience, these are really considered somewhat routine in nature. However, due to state law, we do need to bring them through a public hearing process. So bear with us. Parviz, do you have anything to add to your staff report?
Unless you have any questions.
Okay.
No.
Motion? Or I'm sorry, is there a motion to close the public hearing? I'm sorry, is there anyone here from the public that wishes to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion?
Move to close the public hearing.
Thank you.
Second.
76.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay.
Move the introduction of resolution
Mike, is your-
2005, adoption of resolution 2005-76.
Thank you.
Second.
Christine?
Councilmember King?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott? Yes. Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes. The next item is 7B, consideration of abandonment of a 10-foot wide strip along the easterly side of Fay Avenue from Manor Drive to the westerly corner of APN 049-134-110. I do have a speaker slip from Joseph Little. If you're interested in speaking before the council, but it's up to you.
My name is Joseph Little. I live in San Carlos on 31 Fay Avenue. At issue is this abandonment. As it is drawn up, I gave a tacit approval to doing so. There's actually both B and C, which is the same segment of land. There's two different parts. One's a utility easement, and one is the actual ownership of the city. The problem is that I see it is that as drawn up right now, it takes the line of the properties directly to the street. The street is a windy street, and almost all of our driveways actually come from the street from the upper end to the lower end. So my concern is that currently, as drawn up, my driveway will become the ownership of my neighbor's property. My neighbor's driveway will become the ownership of my property. So not sure if that was taken into consideration and if there's anything else needs to be done with this, but I was told that since most of this goes through the utility easement, that this is a grandfathered clause or issue, but it just from what was drawn up is there's straight lines down and everybody's driveway becomes someone else's property.
Okay. This is an abandonment of an easement. Parviz, would you like to address Mr. Little's concerns, please?
Yes. I'm sorry.
He's at 31 Fay.
31 Fay. My driveway is right here. Right here. So you see the property line, it actually goes here and through here because this is the road.
I understand, but this that is going to be abandoned becomes your property. So part of your driveway, rather than being within the public right-of-way, it ends up being on your property.
Yes, my driveway is through 37. 21's driveway goes through part of 31. Well, actually not my property yet, the city and easement property. So subsequent property for 21's driveway will go through the corner of the sort of darker line to this thing here, will become my property. Because the road is not accurate. As you see here, it's going to touch here, and my 31 will go to 37.
Parviz, I think to help Mr. Little, the city is just abandoning a right-of-way. If you go to a title company, and I deal with this in my private business, your rights and ownership has not changed. All that comes off of your property, off of your title report, is this easement that the city had. There's no change in title. There's no change in the APN of your ownership.
I thought there was two parts. One was the easement for utility, and one was for the city property, which is
there is an abandonment portion.
Right.
that goes beyond the easement and is beyond the utility to the street.
Right.
And the problem is our access to the streets is now going to be, by the way it's drawn up strictly, the lines are straight. They encompass the neighbor's property. So part of the maintenance of my neighbor's driveway is in my property, and the maintenance of my driveway is in my neighbor's property.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to suggest that we postpone this item until this gentleman can resolve this with the city engineer, public works director, and have it brought back after discussion between these two parties.
I recommend you continue this item.
Okay, so let's continue this item to a date specific. Next agenda?
It could be a little more involved, so.
Because it's the abandonment of a public utility easement, not actually abandonment or title change, correct?
The second part, the second one that is public utility easement, that's fine, there's no problem there. But the one that we abandoned the right of way, that may take a little more time, even though all property owners said they agreed on this, but.
Okay, so why don't we postpone this to the second meeting in October then? Because the first meeting in October,
That's fine.
okay. And then if need be, we can continue with that item again?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much. So that item has been continued. The next item this evening is the consideration of abandonment of a, just for, do we need to close the public hearing?
Same thing.
Mr. Lanzone? Bob?
I think we're just clarifying your action. You passed the first abandonment. You're continuing the second
Madam
and
Mayor,
third one,
I'd like to
correct?
make a motion to take the second two items and agendize it.
Okay, so they're both the
Right.
same item. All right, so yes, we are continuing items 7B and C.
B and C.
Then from a
24.
housekeeping perspective, do we need to close the public hearing and then reopen it at that time?
No, just continue with the public hearing open.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor, just for clarity, I am moving items 7B and C to a date specific. You suggested
The second meeting in October.
Correct. A second?
Is there a second?
Yes, why not the second meeting in September?
Parvis didn't seem to
doesn't
think
have
he
time.
could get it done in time.
Need a little more time.
Okay, second meeting in October, yes, second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Christine?
When is the second meeting in October?
The second,
It's
the
the 24th.
24th.
Monday in
Okay.
October.
I'm gone from the middle of the month to that day.
Okay, yeah, the 24th. Okay. Christine?
Yes.
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes. Next item under new business is a report from the Council Building Ad Hoc Subcommittee. And we do have actually a couple of recommendations. Jack, do you want to give a quick rundown?
Yes, good evening, Mayor and council members. In 2004, the city contracted with Zucker Associates, Zucker Systems actually, to analyze and report on the functions of the building department, plan check, inspection, and code enforcement. Their report was done about mid-2004, and they had approximately 50-odd recommendations for improvement of the department. They were quite insistent on meetings with the building department management and council. They mentioned it in the 50-odd recommendations. They mentioned it number 1, number 6, and number 49. I'm not sure if they were stuttering or if they just want to reiterate their position. But nonetheless, that was one of the large facets of their report. After that report was issued, Vice Mayor Grocott and Councilman Eaton were drafted, secured, somehow finagled into serving on the committee, and did so admirably. We started the meetings in September '04, and usually at least 1 to 2 meetings per month until approximately July. We discussed primarily building department policies as they do with code enforcement, our category violation system, garage conversions, A-frames, fences, tear-down policy, which is a relatively recent policy we had to deal with, and quite a few other issues that are clearly in the report, or the minutes are in the report. We have kept the minutes all the way through the various discussions, and again, those highlights of those meetings are in the report that you have in your packet. I will turn it over to either Vice Mayor Grocott or Councilman Eaton for further action at your leisure, at your choosing.
Jack, right before this meeting, Matt and I got together and we had a little chat, and I think what we'd like you to do is just give us a brief synopsis of each of these items, A through M, and if we choose to comment on them as a council, I think, well, we can all read, obviously, but just for the benefit of the public, too, to let us know in a 1 or 2 sentence or a 3 sentence, or maybe it's a little bit longer than that, scenario of what the item was about, and in general what the conclusion was, and we'll just zip right through these, and as appropriate, we'll have additional discussion. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah.
Good.
If you've got the time, I've got the energy.
We think that it's an important enough issue that we that we let everybody know what we did and the depth of what we did and why we're trying to smooth out the processes and make everything work a little bit better, so to speak. And then again, certain items we're not going to be able to consider tonight. They're far too deep, and we'll get into those when you hit those items.
Great. I'll start in with number A, which is the policies that we have incorporated on our category system of violations. As you well know, we write 3 categories of violations when we come onto a property for the inspection process. Category 1 violations are violations that you would frankly suspect we might write on a water heater. We're going to write water heater violations, and that's what we call a Category 1. They have to do with the exact permit that was issued. Category 2 violations are life safety violations that we run across while we're inspecting that water heater, as an example. We may see missing firewalls, missing fire doors, or the infamous egg crate fire door that I have in the lobby. Category 3 violations are violations which are a little more large in size, frankly. They're garage conversions, they're sheds, they're structures that we find that are in violation of not only building codes but zoning codes. They may or may not have life safety implications depending. Unfortunately, each one is interdependent of each other. Some may be dangerous, some may not. So those are Category 3. We currently make sure the safety issues are correct with those types of violations. A garage conversion is a typical violation such as a Category 3. And then we'll post the title as per the municipal code that there is an ongoing violation with the property.
What led into this whole item was just the topic of enforcement and how the building department enforces the various codes. Sometimes, and with no disrespect to any of our employees, different people work on different items because of vacations, because of, there's a number of different things, just scheduling, and it's a little hard for some consistency. That causes somebody some consternation sometimes because one inspector will look at one thing and another will look at another. Jack and his department, I think Matt and I came away confident, will really strive to be consistent in everything that they do. They'll try to be fair in everything that they do. I think both Matt and I got an education as to the fact that the building department is a pretty large target, if I can put it that way, because a lot of times for safety reasons, the building department is, of course, that's the reason they're in existence. But there are a lot of disagreements. There's a lot of jockeying back and forth. There's a lot of people who think that they understand everything and how to do it, and I have confidence in our city staff that they do understand the code and the reasons why that's enforced. Our goal, I think, was to work with Jack and make sure that he trains his people well in being user-friendly, in being consistent, and providing service, and as much as possible providing as much common sense to the building inspection process, and just to be able to work more closely with the public and have a little more of a, not that it's a mean adversarial role, but although sometimes it gets that way, not because it's Jack's fault, but or his employees' fault, but just to try to make that whole process a lot smoother. And that's the reason we got into the definition of the different types of categories of violations and how we go about trying to enforce those as a city and the reasons we enforce what we do.
So the recommendation is to keep the categories 1, 2, and 3, huh?
Yes, it is. And one of the things we did talk about that I'm just realizing is not in this paragraph was just in terms of public education on this matter. And Jack had shown us at the meeting that we had, the ad hoc meeting on this, he had a little binder put together with pictures of, this fire, and it occurred because of some violation. And it just sends to the public the message, you may you may feel like you're kind of getting away with something, but you may not be, and you may be endangering yourself and your family members and so forth. And so we had suggested some kind of ongoing education program with architects, builders, building designers, and the general public, and possibly using the website, but not anything that would cost us a lot of money to do.
Do you wish full discussion on an inspection on sale program?
We weren't real...
On what, Tom?
On sale.
Inspection on sale.
You're recommending...
we were going to have some meetings with the Board of Realtors people. We never got around to inviting those people here and getting them. So I think for now we would go very weak on that whole subject of additional inspections on sale till we got really into it.
So you're actually tabling that recommendation at this
That
point?
latter paragraph, I think Matt and I both feel that let's just hang off on that one for a while.
Second unit?
Next unit? I mean, next item?
The second thing we talked about briefly was the amnesty program for the secondary living unit. I say briefly because the program is already in existence. It's relatively successful. We don't put a lot of energy into it, but of course, or time, let's put it that way. We don't put a lot of time into the program, but it also does not yield a lot of units. But the units that do come out of that program are good, clean, legal units, and I can't count on both hands and feet the number we've had in the last couple of years, and basically we haven't spent a lot of time on it, but we also, I guess our time is yielding exactly what we put into it. We have a couple of new units out of the program, and that's frankly to be expected. The next item we had is a web access for permit information. The subcommittee was very informative on their wishes to get additional methods to reach out to our applicants and let them know that we have web-based access to their applications and their permits. And we are doing that currently with half sheets of paper that we're attaching to each one of the permits that goes out the door. It tells them how to check on their permit, check on their activity of their plan check if they haven't received their permit yet. And also lately we can also order their inspections out through the web.
I have a follow-up question on that. Do we actually, when someone turns in a set of plans, set their expectations on when a permit may be able to be pulled? I know I just recently went through a TI with the city of Hayward and, was able to do it over the counter, but they basically said, 10 days. And sure enough, actually within 9 business days, I got the phone call saying permit was ready. Do we do the same thing?
We do something similar, but our range, unfortunately, is much broader than that. It really depends on the quality of the application coming in the door. I could tell horror stories about permits that have been in our back room since 2004 and still are not ready to go out the door because of back and forth with the architect, engineer, et cetera. And on the other side, we've thrown permits out the door in 5 to 10 days when the application process and everything is in it is complete and ready to go.
I understand that. I mean, there's a lot of complexity. I would imagine a full house remodel versus a bathroom modification or renovation. They're probably, very, very different cases.
Yes.
But I was just curious if we do have, just even internally within the building department, some sort of standard that you would like to say, 95% of the time we'd like to be able to turn around minor permit types of things within X period of time and actually measure to that to see how well the department is doing and based on the number. I know you track the number of plans that are coming in, the valuation of all of those things. Are you also tracking how long they're taking so that you know?
I personally get into the system and look at permits that have been around for a while and of course wonder why they're still here, and I'll track them down myself to find out if they're being hung up in public works, planning, if we've got them for a structural or energy reason or why they're being held up. And I personally track those to find out why they're being hung up, frankly. To answer the first part of your question, we divide up our applications when they come in the door, immediately when they do come in the door. And we have a huge number of permits, as you mentioned, kitchen remodels, bath remodels. Those types of permits are rolled over normally in one day. We call it our quick check program, and we have a plan checker / inspector that deals with that every day. And if there's nothing particularly complicated about it, we roll them over virtually overnight. So a huge deal of our applications that come in that manner are turned over quickly. TIs are a little more fussy. We have a lot of biotechs and a lot of interesting TIs that are joining our community, and we're pleased to see them, but they have a little higher degree of plan check before we throw them out the door.
Is there, again, I guess my underlying question is, do you create a report that you review maybe quarterly that shows the amount of time on average that that applications have been in queue, depending on the type of application that it is? Or do you even have the capability to produce such a report?
Currently, I would say I'd have to produce a report manually. I'm not sure that our tag mark system can kick that report out, but I need to consult with Justin. He's our brains of the computerization.
Okay. I think it would be interesting to sort of track to see what sort of metrics we're looking at, especially if they're getting hung up more. I think it would be a valuable data point in terms of setting expectations of applicants coming in that, we're behind. We're currently running 6 weeks versus 3 weeks type of thing.
I can do that.
I can speak to just experience from dealing with the city of San Carlos. I ask the same question when I bring things in, and typically the staff, the people working the counter, they do know, and they'll tell you whether it's 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever. And I've had the same experience you had, Inga, where I'll get, say 4 weeks, I'll pass that on to the client, and generally they're on mark. And I think what Jack was saying earlier is right on, that it depends on the quality of the work that's being brought in. If you have quality work and you've taken notes and have everything on the plans that ought to be there, they're usually pretty good about giving you an idea and then getting back in that time period. One thing we did talk about, Jack, with Don and I, was the idea of looking over plans quickly to see if there are any, there's the game that gets played sometimes is you turn in a set of plans to get them in the queue, knowing sure well that you're not complete. So looking at plans when they come in and kicking those out so that people can't play that game with it.
You mean that the application is incomplete?
Yeah, they purposely don't have their Title 24 report, or they don't have whatever, and they know darn well they don't, but they're just trying to get in the queue, and then they'll come in later and say, I forgot these sheets or whatever.
Yeah.
But it mucks up the system is what happens.
With all due respect, you are vice mayor and on council, so I'm sure that they're not going to slip yours. I guess from my perspective, I was looking at more of an objective type of report that says, we can track this and we know objectively how well we're doing, sort of from the overall perspective. And that's all. That's my point. I don't need to belabor this one at all.
Okay. Item C talks specifically about the consumer, the citizen, and how, because they're calling up saying, well, what's the status of my plans? Well, all that takes staff time. And so item C deals specifically with just web access to the permit information and when they're expected to be out and how that kind of works in the queue. That's what item C is. We've gotten off into item K, which deals with time constraints, and we have an in-house plan checker. But the question has come up, and we discussed this with with Jack, as to can specific deadlines be set. For example, I experienced a city in the East Bay. They said first time you're in, 3 weeks max and you're out, as long as you have a complete set of plans. And that Jack makes a very valid point about that, because people do, unfortunately, play a lot of games that way. The second time they're in, 2 weeks out, as long as they're complete. Third time in, a week out. That was one example. Other cities have their own standards that way. We had a discussion with regard to if there is an ongoing backlog, perhaps we should use more outside plan checking sources. It gets into a budgetary issue, and we now understand a whole lot better as to how that really works. Not that the city is trying to make $1 zillion and balance its entire budget based on building inspection fees, because it's not, or plan check fees, it's not. On the other hand, there are fees obviously generated by that, and those fees are in-house. So the question is, where's that balance lay between giving an optimum level of service? You can turn stuff around in one day, in theory, if you have that many people working on it. Well, we're not quite going to be that good, because it's going to crank up a whole lot more bureaucracy than I think we're prepared to handle here. On the other hand, where is that balancing point? And we've had those discussions with Jack about that, and we understand his point of view on that also. So that's kind of where we get into.
Yeah.
On K, Don has moved over to K. The point is, we slipped over to K in the discussion, and so he's gone over to K.
I've gone over to K anyway, just so we can hit that in the same topic.
Okay, but back to the issue. Two questions I have on C is, is it the recommendation to put the definitions of categories 1, 2, and 3 on the web? So when people say I got a category 1, bingo, they're going to go there and say this is the violation.
No, you're jumping.
You're mixing A with C now.
I said, the question is web access for permit information.
Oh, okay.
And you guys said under 1, we're going to put up this information. So is this the place we put it? The definitions, okay.
That is one place to put.
I believe the definitions are already on the web.
Before we get to K, is that if you have a complete application, when you put the permit in there, can't you just say application complete, or can you put missing items 1, 2, 3?
We will take in the application, and it will get disseminated to the other departments so they can start working on it. And frankly, building department will hold the application and hold the plan check until we get the Title 24, for instance, or the engineering calcs or whatever's missing.
I understand it, but if I go in and look at my permit, can I say missing plans?
It may say that.
Incomplete plans.
Yeah,
They
it
say
may say
right
that.
on the
Yes.
right on the thing. Okay.
And
the
There's
date.
Yeah, the applicants and
addresses Inga's point about when does the meter start running? You can't.
No, actually, my point was not that at all. My point is not, I have no issue whatsoever with web access. I think it's a great idea in terms of allowing sort of at-will access to information about their application, their permit, all of that type of thing. I don't have any issue with that at all. My point was really more about, are we looking at or are we measuring ourselves from the standpoint of how long we're processing these applications through? And
That's an item K item. We can really get into it, or we can take it up
that was
now.
my question. So,
ready to move on? Move on to D?
Move on, yeah.
no, I don't think it is
Come back to
K,
that when we
but
get to item K.
I really don't think it is K. I know that K influences, that has to do with how many outside consultants do we throw at this.
That's how we got to K.
My question is really, do we measure our performance? And what I'm hearing is that currently we do not measure our performance.
That's correct.
Is there any recommendation from the subcommittee to measure performance?
Is it reasonably convenient to do with the software we have? And that's where Jack says he's got to check.
And I'm seeing Liz nodding her head saying yes. So given the understanding that it may be feasible and reasonable to ask building to produce such a report and to measure themselves and to share that information, do the subcommittee, would that be one of your recommendations?
It would be if it's, the concern I have is, I know these people work pretty hard already, they got a lot of stuff they're doing, and if you throw another level of administrative report writing and bureaucracy on top of them, they're going to fall further behind, unless the software is there and they can do that pretty easily.
Yeah, because I'll go back to the whole reason why we started this up in the first place is because, well, I don't know about my fellow council members, we were getting complaints about a couple of things. First and foremost, gotchas from the building inspector. You'd be going in to check a water heater, and the next thing they knew, they had to move a window, replace a door between their garage and their kitchen, and fix a couple of other types of, which are legitimate types of things, but they felt like it was a gotcha. And the second was that it wasn't easy, and we weren't sort of business friendly in terms of the contractor, wanting to come in and to do business within San Carlos from the standpoint of the building professional, the architect, the contractors, those types of things. And those are my two big issues. And I appreciate this whole report in specific recommendations, but I think from my standpoint as a council member, at the end of the day, I want to know how well we're doing in terms of measuring, or how well we're doing, and the only way I know to do that is by measuring performance. And otherwise, you can say, yeah, I think we're doing pretty good, but you know what, if I said that in business, I think we're doing pretty good, my CEO would be saying, show me the data behind that sort of, yeah, we're doing pretty good. And so I don't want to rely just on a verbal, we're doing okay, because clearly we weren't, or we wouldn't have undertaken this in the first place.
Well, one way or the other, we'll either do it through the computerization or we'll do it, period. It's going to happen.
Okay,
You will
thank
get the
you.
report.
Well, is that the consensus of the?
Well, yeah,
council,
I
or
would
just-
ask my fellow council members, I mean,
That's what we started this thing.
I thought that's where, there's, some of this stuff is low-hanging fruit, and, we go through recommendation by recommendation, and I agree, but I think the overall, the higher level is that are we doing a good job in providing these services to the citizens of San Carlos, or are we doing as good a job as we can do, given budgetary constraints and the cost of providing services and everything else?
We realize that we're a monopoly within the city, okay? We also, and on more than one meeting, we had some very candid conversations, and we reiterated what various contractors had told us. And granted, sometimes these were one-sided stories, and so we kind of got the other side too, and that was fine. But I think we said it enough times where Jack understands that the whole purpose for why we got together is coming out in the results that Jack is trying to produce with his department. That did not go swept under the rug at all. And so with the resources that Jack has to run the building department, and given the charge that he has, which is to keep buildings safe, that all things considered, Jack's doing a pretty good job. On the other hand, there's always some glitches. He's a target again. We want to minimize those targets. We want to make his department be perceived as more user-friendly. We want to see a lot more service orientation to the public. A lot of these things come with education. They come with training with both the public as well as the staff. Doesn't mean there's bad people on either side. It just means they need some training. They need some education. We, I think, expressed the desire that a lot more common sense be put into building inspection processes, and maybe a little less line item and a little more, yeah, I understand what you're really trying to do, let's work with it. On the other hand, Jack gave us a number of examples where his staff did just that. So, I mean, it's not like the building department is the bad guy here. It's just that we hear stories as council members that not all the time, but many times are one-sided stories too.
Oh, absolutely.
So
And
we tried to take that into perspective. And
Right.
Jack understands the message, I think.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I agree with you. And I think that furthermore, as a council member, if I had a piece of data from Jack that said, you know, at 95% of the time we're processing applications in 4 weeks or less, I could push back on that one contractor, whoever it is that's calling me, and say, okay, so what's different about your application? It must be incomplete, or, you know, it must be overly complex, or there must be unanswered questions, because 95% of the time this process works well. But without, you know, otherwise it's he said, she said, and that's what I'm trying to avoid in this. And I agree 100%, you know, if I look through this, there's a number of recommendations that I think are kind of no-brainers. Yeah, educate, absolutely. You know, I think we should definitely look at how we inform the public, how we educate the public, just like, you know, in planning as well, what that whole process is. Try to make it seamless. Try to put the perspective on customer service. You know, hats off to Jack and his team for the customer service reply cards. How well are we doing? I get those, you know, see some of them or hear some of the feedback, and, you know, I think that we get enough positive ones to say, you know what, maybe there really isn't that big of a problem. It's the exceptions that are the ones that we're getting the calls over. So, you know, with some of this stuff, you know, I guess I would look to Jack to say, okay, do you need additional resources in terms of bodies? Do you need additional, you know, money to implement some of these things? And tell us, you know, this is a great report. And I've read through it. I mean, my fellow council members, we've all read through it. And I appreciate the hard work that both Don and Matt put into it, and Jack and your staff. But I'd love to see a summary. Here are the top level recommendations, and here's what I need to execute on them. I need money, or I need staff, or I need, you know, whatever it is. And then we can really sort of fine tune what, you know, is there general support for this?
Okay, Jack, why don't you move on to D?
Will do. D is a discussion we had regarding perception of some applicants that they're not getting a total story when they come in with an initial application. They're really at the planning stage. There's not hard plans drawn yet. And that item D discusses our discussion regarding a possible third person that sort of rides between both departments, planning and building, and perhaps has the knowledge of our plan checkers and planning technicians to get the first line of comment correct, so that there's no major outstanding comments from either department that would hit them sideways and something unexpected. So we talked about that for a while, and the possibility of securing that person to do that particular job, frankly, to be able to meet the criteria of both departments and produce that initial list that's fairly inclusive.
Yeah, just because of the nature of how cities are set up with different departments, there's 3, 4, 5 different departments that get a shot at plans along the way. The idea is to not have any surprises again, and we were just trying to figure out ways, and I think Matt and I both would prefer the second option, which is training some in-house staff people to make that process smoother. So, somebody doesn't get, they're approved with fire, they're approved with planning, all of a sudden building smacks them with something, or vice versa on any of those things. We're just trying to smooth the process out and trying to encourage not only Jack, but the other department heads to work more closely together.
I think the term I would use here is intra-departmental training. And I would like to add the comment that another reason we liked that idea, Don and I, over the idea of a single person that we bring in that's new, is because if you do more of the second option, and you do that with a couple of people, or even, again, interdepartmental training, especially in the two key departments here, as far as face-to-face with the public, is building and planning. You're not going to go to the counter there and somebody from South County Fire is going to sit down and talk with you about your plans. But for building and planning to know some of the requirements of South County Fire, like, for instance, regarding sprinklers and when that kicks in, those kinds of things, or other issues. The importance of having more than one person is because sometimes somebody's on vacation or sick or whatever. Life happens. And if you put all your reliance on one individual and that individual doesn't happen to be there, now you've got yourself a problem. Whereas if you trained a number of people, you reduce that risk.
Also keep in mind that in that same vein, we do have major conferences with applicants when they're at the preliminary stage, and we'll actually bring in someone from planning, building, public works, and fire, and we'll sit down with the applicants and hopefully get all the major items out of the way, and even any minor ones that we can bring to their attention as soon as possible. And we really never talked about this too much at the ad hoc committees. But this has been ongoing since I've been here.
We did a little bit, or I can't quite remember if we did at the meeting or if I had talked to Liz about this later, or you, Jack, is the valuation of remodels and additions that are done these days. In some cases, like Inga's talking about a TI, you can do a house remodel that challenges the cost of a commercial TI.
You're right.
In other words, the numbers are getting pretty equal. So to treat a commercial applicant in the fashion you described, but not treat a very large house remodel that way, is a little bit inequitable. And so we did talk about that sometimes you might look at a residential project and say, you know what, hold on here, Mr. Architect or Mrs. Architect, we need to reschedule a meeting. We need to sit down with you and have some other people at the table here.
Actually, you're correct about 95% of the time. The degree of residential remodels that we're experiencing right now are 3 times or 4 times as difficult as a standard TI. Standard TI has almost no structural, has some energy, some handicapped accessibility issues, and other than that, it's relatively simple. The resis by far are more complicated.
Item E.
Do we want to dare talk about garage conversions?
Only just briefly, because this is going to be one of those items that is so complex in the end, and it's going to take a lot more time than 3 minutes or 5 minutes to breeze over it. This is one of the items that I think that Matt and I are going to recommend to the City Council as a whole, that we run by the Planning Commission, that we get their input, and then eventually it'll work its way back up to Council. There are a number of illegal garage conversions, a particularly large number in certain neighborhoods. And then, of course, frankly, they're scattered throughout the city, but there's a far larger number of them in certain neighborhoods. It would be, I think, Matt and my recommendation that we try to figure out a way to work with those that have already been converted in some way to satisfy reasonable parking needs, to satisfy aesthetic needs, and to, people will do an illegal garage conversion because they need the space. I mean, this is just how, human nature works. Our goal is to make sure that those additions are safe, and we would potentially propose, subject to how this comes back up, through planning and back up to the council, that these garage conversions potentially be made legal, subject to an inspection for safety-related purposes, because that's our prime goal, but also to make sure that we do have sufficient amounts of parking that is done in an aesthetically pleasing way, not just concrete over your front lawn, to use the extreme example. We don't want that either, regardless of the neighborhood. So there goes a lot more in discussion that really goes into this, is what I'm really trying to say.
Well said.
Did I cover your topic, Josh?
Yes, you did, sir.
Okay. Move on with item F.
Okay, great. I just want to mention that we, on occasion, that we managed to kidnap the planning director and drag her into our meetings, and we got into some planning issues that mainly because building department does a lot of code enforcement of zoning ordinances. And during one of those meetings, the planning director announced that for efficiency purposes, she was reducing the available counter hours, and frankly, I think that it's already been done, and I believe it works very well at this point.
The only thing I would add to that, Jack, and this came up in Don and I's chat right before the meeting, was just that we might get a report back from planning, say in about 6 months' time, to just let the council know how that's working, and if you've had any snafus and maybe how you work through those, just a report on how well it's working. I'd like to just quickly jump back, I'm sorry, to garage conversions. That sentence that reads, the council ad hoc committee recommends exploration of means to approve garage conversions, and then it says in a specific area. And I think actually when we talked about that, we deleted the idea of it being in a specific area, and we talked about it. If we're going to do something, it has to be citywide.
It does, yeah.
Right, and not for a specific neighborhood.
That's something fairly technical about the size of garages, and something where we're going to have to be consistent citywide, because we can't just create certain rules for certain neighborhoods. Right. It doesn't work that way. Right. And I think as we explained it to rational people who live in rational, reasonable neighborhoods, they're going to understand that too. So we'll work with that.
Okay. On to G.
Item G, Don, Councilman Eaton has the brochure that we had discussed, and it's also put on CDs. So we're hoping we can get it on the city website and produce it in a couple of different manners. It's typical violations that we find in San Carlos and frankly all over the Bay Area. But last time I looked, we're in the Bay Area. So H is an item regarding a gentleman that had spoke at public comment regarding our city's venture into the 2002 National Electrical Code ahead of the state. Our reading of the Health and Safety Code allows us to do so, and we did. We adopted it last year, and the state of California caught up with us in August, so we are all in the same code, and I think the subject is moot at this point. Is that a lawyer word? Yeah. Item I, we talked about A-frame enforcement. Currently, as most of us know, we have gone through a lot of effort this past summer, especially in notifying folks that have the A-frames out. We notify them 2 or 3 times, and frankly, at the 3rd or 4th time, we pick up the sign as per our municipal code instructs us to do. Unfortunately, it creates a lot of animosity that we're really not looking forward to. And the ad hoc committee discussed many different ways of rewriting the ordinance, providing other areas to display those signs, and those types of issues that involve the off-site placement and the right-of-way placement of signs.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is we did talk about, there's a couple places in town, certain intersections where people put up all kinds of
4 or 5 of them, actually.
4 or 5 A-frame signs, and the reason those came into the mix of conversation is because folks who were putting up A-frame signs for businesses and told that they couldn't have them pointed to those intersections and said, well, how come you can do those? And so the discussion ensued that maybe what we should do is build some kind of permanent kiosk structures at these places where two things could happen. One, businesses could sign up to sort of take care of that sign, and for that they could have kind of a generic looking advertisement of something, you know, this sign taken care of by, you know, Kinko's
Or even
Coffeehouse
pay to
whatever.
build, as the case may be.
It would pay the bill. And that we might have some of those, that kind of sign, and then it would have, you know, a place to slip in the event that's being announced, take them in and out. And then we would get rid of all the service club tripods and so forth. All that said, I think Don and I are feeling like, given where we're going budget-wise, we're going to just have to put that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we might have to put that on ice for a while.
Right. The initial estimate we were given for just a kiosk type of thing where you could substitute signs in and out and have those placed at 4 or 5 or 6 convenient locations where a lot of the community service clubs typically place their tripods. We thought, well, we're not sure if that's really going to do the job, number one. You could expand that to electronic signs where you could change them and they could rotate, but yet you do that tastefully. But the idea was to get rid of the junkier look, so to speak, and that's what A-frame signs are really all about, in addition to the safety feature of it. So we think we need a little more exploration of that. We had requested some examples of some tripod-type signs, and we didn't get around to getting any, or not tripod signs, but kiosk sort of things that could be used for that purpose. I don't think we saw any of those examples. Surely they exist somewhere, and other cities have done some things like that, so perhaps we could do a little more exploration that way, and in accordance with budgetary concerns, as well as trying to blend where the aesthetics work and trying to be fair to anybody and everybody who puts up some sort of an A-frame sign. That's why we had some pretty good discussions about this whole thing.
Next item we discussed was J, the fence enforcement policy. Our fence enforcement policy is relatively straightforward. When we see new fencing go up, and unfortunately we can only enforce after the project's been completed. We normally see them Monday and Tuesday morning when our inspectors are out on their rounds, and there are new fences installed contrary to the municipal code. Normally it's corner fences and or fences over 4 feet tall in the front yards, and we'll leave notices of noncompliance at those properties and require them to cut them back down to meet the municipal code. The second part of the enforcement policy are existing fences that pose liability, and normally these are fences that are over that 3-foot height limit in corners and other fences that violate the code that have been there for quite a while. Our check of history of that particular ordinance goes back to the mid-50s, and 3- and 4-foot requirements have been in the code, in the municipal code, obviously for 50 years. So there's likely no grandfathered issue at stake here of building it unless they built it sometime before the 50s. And frankly, most wood fences do not last 50 years. So there may be a few wrought iron fences out there or stone fences that predate our ordinance. But other than that, we rely on the complaint process to write those fences up if need be.
Do we require a permit for a fence replacement?
No, sir.
So then the question of whether it's 6 or 7 with lattice or 4 at the corner, it's really up to the homeowner to understand all this before he starts issuing contracts to his...
That is correct, and we receive many phone calls inquiring, and we're perfectly willing to send an inspector out, and we'll take out curb markers, and we'll stripe the curb for them, telling where they can build up to and how high, and it's the simplest process in the world. But for a person who's not used to the municipal code enforcement or the actual words of the code, it often takes them aback. Mm-hmm. So we'll just gladly come out and mark it up. We'd much rather take 5 minutes to mark it up than go through a whole notice of noncompliance process and where all that goes.
That sounds like something like an education issue, almost something we ought to put in our Parks and Rec bulletin for the spring, which is because I know a lot of the fence replacements happen in the summer. Yep. And I mean, everyone in the city gets that publication. Maybe we could get, here's a primer 101 for the general house cleaning kinds of things that may be happening this summer, deck rebuilds, accessory structures, fences. I mean, because I know a bunch of people are out, they get all excited because they want to do stuff outside, and that seems to be when, these little homeowner types of projects tend to be the ones that, I'd hate to see a gotcha on, because usually it's, people are doing it themselves, or, we can't rely on the contractor who's doing it to, if they say, build it 6 feet with a 7-foot lattice, then they have to, pay them to come back out and fix it if it's not right.
Currently, we have some excellent fences that we photographed that do comply with code, and we have them rolling on the city's Channel 27 along with the other notices, and they're great fences that citizens have built out there, and we couldn't ask for better examples to put on the tube.
Okay, great.
We're at J.K. Outside plan check consultants. Don alluded to it earlier. We do have outside plan check consultants, and we utilize them, frankly, for larger jobs where I don't want to bury the single plan check engineer that we have doing a plan check for a major building that will, frankly, take her resources for 1 to 2 weeks and put everything else in the back burner. So we currently do use outside consultants. The Zucker report said to obtain more consultants, but we've had little major construction in the last couple of years that will require us to add more than the single outside consultant that we have now. So frankly, we are already doing that, and it works quite well. They handle the larger projects, the engineering aspect, and our staff still does the code check for the exiting and handicap and those issues, which is we're fairly good at.
On K, we, both Matt and I, I'm sure, certainly recognize the fact that a lot of the delays and hence a lot of the half-story complaints that we get in are because of incomplete plans and incomplete things that have been submitted, and there's a lot of people who are literally just into the business to play games and try to get away with what they can. That said, and with no offense to all the good people who just do it really straight, because there's a lot of those good people too, but there are people who try to abuse their privilege. That said, I think both Matt and I definitely, on behalf of the council, encourage Jack to be more efficient in the use of outside plan checkers where appropriate, to speed up the process, to talk about all those things we talked about 20 minutes ago.
Next item is remodeling / additions versus reconstruction. I guess the south portion of the county has finally caught up to us. An increasing number of applicants are coming in the door with virtual deconstruction of their existing properties. It's nothing uncommon to see second-story additions. That's been going on for years, but now we're seeing folks who want to take it all the way down to the. In one instance, it's all the way down to the floor. There's not a wall standing, and we run into an issue of certain requirements, specifically fire sprinkler requirements, come into being when they have such a dramatic loss of habitability in the structure. When we've written our policy around that portion of what occurs when the houses are no longer habitable, or they no longer have a ceiling, floor, roof, bathroom, electric power, anything. We consider those new structures for the purpose of primarily for sprinklers. There's not a lot of other fees that roll into that. I think the fees are, frankly, the same as they were before. If you add a bedroom, you have a park dedication fee. But most of those buildings, they're not rebuilding a 3-bedroom house or rebuilding a 5-bedroom house or sometimes a 6-bedroom house. So the issue that really comes up here is one of primarily the requirement for sprinklers, and a secondary issue, of course, is the issue of maintaining an existing setback that they may have had with the existing house, and their ability to maintain a wall or a set of walls to try to maintain their planning setback or their zoning setback. So these are issues that there's no two projects alike, and each one of them we have to look at and confer if this thing meets our policy of a tear down, or is it just a simple room addition that's run amok. So we do make those determinations, and primarily, again, I'll mention it is for sprinklers because the other fees are basically the same.
I'm sorry, I had a question about the recommendation, because it seems to me it's actually more of a planning type of recommendation that has to do with nonconforming setbacks. Is it the recommendation of the ad hoc subcommittee that go through sort of the normal planning commission channels for recommendation back to the full council?
Yeah, this was one of the, I think, 3 items that we felt needed further consideration. This is far more complicated when you get right down to it. When you're looking at somebody's house plans or remodel plans, then you can talk about it in 5 or 10 minutes, and you can get into specific examples, and we did, as to how some people will try to get around the law, some people will try to just take advantage of setbacks and all sorts of different things, and we're trying to revisit it in a way that's going to be the best thing in the end. And so, yes is the answer.
Okay, so it should go back to planning?
Yes.
Okay.
One of the things that we discussed in relationship to this item was, do we even want to create the situation, especially I think when we were talking about setbacks, do we want to create the situation where people play games? And I don't say that like people are trying to do a bad thing, but sometimes you get into a situation where you've drawn a set of plans, you're showing walls as being existing, and for whatever reason, a lot of times it's because of monetary and things can go faster. The builder takes it upon himself to just wipe out all the walls down to the floor platform. And then the building department comes out and says, what the heck happened here? I'm looking at a set of plans that's got these walls existing. And by wiping out all the walls, unbeknownst perhaps to the contractor, he's just kicked in setbacks for, maybe the house is sitting 3 feet from the property line. Now he's got to move it to 5 feet. And so you just open up a whole can of worms by doing that. And so rather than perhaps imposing that on everybody, simply say, or the other one is the foundation repair. You look at the foundation, the contractor figures out that there's no steel in this foundation. So he wants to take it out. He takes out the wall. He takes out the foundation. He's just trying to fix something that's not safe. And again, he kicks in this whole setback issue. So what we talked about was maybe we just give him the setback. If that's where as far as where the existing house or structure, whatever, whether it's a house or commercial building, I guess, I don't know. If it's sitting on that line, that's the footprint of it, fine, you get to keep it. You can do whatever you want, because what we talked to Jack about is what's of more importance is the safety issue, and that these buildings are structurally sound, and people don't have to try to undermine an existing foundation to put in a new one and do all these things. They can just, if that's their setback, they get to keep it, whether it's new construction or old, they can keep it. But then Jack brought up points about fire safety. If we did that, we would have to enforce windows being back 5 feet from the property line, things like that. So this gets kind of complex, and that's why we wanted to send it back to planning and let it come all the way up until it gets to us.
Yeah, great.
The last topic of our discussion was construction, the difficulty the building department is having discovering structures in the that are under construction and have been built in the riparian setback areas of the various creeks in the city. And unfortunately, it's difficult for our inspectors to read the ordinance and come up with the same conclusions each time, because frankly, there's not a lot in this city that abuts the creek that is identical to the lot that's next to it. And the definitions of top of bank, middle of creek, and all of these definitions that are used in and out of that ordinance are virtually make it impossible to enforce. So there was a lot of conversation on that, and probably a dozen decent solutions, all of which probably have to go back and start through the planning process with the consultant and or a discussion surely at the planning commission level.
And does Liz do you want to make a comment on that at all? We had talked earlier about some things.
Looks like we have a new work program after tonight.
Yeah.
There were basically, I think, 6 kind of general items I got from the council subcommittee. First, looking at sort of a more practical approach to utilization of the riparian corridor. allowing people to do some low-intensive type uses without having to go through planning commission exceptions and all of that. Secondly, to look at defining the where you take the creek setback from, top of bank, center of creek, whatever that may be. The committee also wanted to enhance education, to look at the amortization issue of the older projects, perhaps not enforcing projects that were not a public health and safety issue and had been built a while back. Also looking at a tiered approach, perhaps to develop some type of design guidelines of the lower intensity uses that I just mentioned. And then finally, consider delegating exceptions to the Exception Design Control Committee or a lower level, more informal type of group that could process those creek exceptions. The caveat that I do have with this, and I've discussed it with the council subcommittee members and Jack Aiello, of course, is that we would need to have an environmental assessment done of the potential impacts associated with that. And I think at this point there are obviously some budget issues associated with that, and we think it might be a good idea for you to examine that perhaps during mid-year budget issues. Jack and our city engineer and myself are working on a proposal from an environmental firm to develop some design guidelines, and it would be a substantial cost for the city to look at that because they essentially would need to map the riparian corridor areas to assess where you might be able to encroach further than the ordinance allows us already. As you may recall, we had a study done about 3 years back which said the environmentally you could support something up to 15 feet from the top of the bank, and the firm was not willing to back up anything further or closer than that, I should say, between the top of the bank and 15 feet. They said when you get into that area, it's a very sensitive area and you really need to process these things at a higher level. So the council could elect to push the study further. There would be a cost. It would be a bit difficult to assess what the results of that would be, but certainly we're willing to pursue that if the council directs staff to do that.
So it sounds like, just to summarize, planning obviously has some recommendations that you'd like to run through the public or the planning commission process, talk to them about sort of a sanity check on some of those things. In terms of for council, the recommendation obviously would include some sort of financial implication, and it may be that it sits on our list of projects for when there's money available, or we may choose to prioritize it up to the top.
That's correct, and I would say the council first. For example, during mid-year budget study, perhaps during general plan, consideration of a general plan update, but I don't think we can go forward to the Planning Commission. At least it would be my professional recommendation not to go forward without having some type of environmental assessment that said where we could go, how far could we go, and how flexible can we be with the creek setback standards.
Okay, and then I had a quick question actually about the recommendation that shows up in this, the staff report, that they're talking about something sort of like arbitrary 5 feet from the center on both sides of the center, therefore creating a 10-foot uniform creek bed.
I'm afraid that's mine, Mayor.
Okay.
I'm trying to use numbers so that my staff can determine what they see if it violates the code or not.
Yeah, because I know creeks tend to do this.
Yes,
and,
they do.
10 feet in one creek might be the actual water line, and 10 feet in the other creek might, because I know we've got some creeks that are a little more than trickles. Okay, so this isn't a recommendation.
That's my recommendation, but it needs a lot of backup.
Yeah, picture, if you will.
No, I don't. I can picture this really well. I don't need to discuss this right now.
4 different creeks.
I think what I really wanted to hear from planning is that, yes, this is a planning issue, and it's not a building issue, and it should go through the appropriate planning channels. And then once it's determined, then it would go to building for enforcement.
Correct.
Well, if I can interject there, it should go to building even for, a perusal of whatever it is that's come up with, because what Jack told Don and I over and over again is his staff suffer from being able to measure anything that's measurable sometimes to determine if there's a violation or not. There's sometimes really no top of bank, and someone's saying, this thing's where it ought not to be, and his guys go out there and they try to, well, where am I supposed to measure from?
Oh, absolutely. No, I agree. I mean, I remember going through all of the riparian corridor setbacks and everything when I was on Planning Commission, and the whole top of bank, what is the top of the bank, and is that the right measurement? That seems to be the de facto standard that's been accepted in cities and local jurisdictions throughout California in terms of that's how we define top of bank. But from a practical standpoint of, you know, you've got a building inspector out there going, okay, I'm walking this off or I'm measuring it off, you know, is it here or is it sort of over here because it sort of slopes this way or they've done some landscaping. So I understand the difficulties in enforcement, no question about it. So, you know, again, I would defer that to the two working together, building and planning, to figure out what makes the most sense from an enforcement standpoint as well as from a planning perspective, and then how do you communicate that out to the general public?
If I can also say that I think the thing that Jack came up with was, you know, all of us were there at one time. I mean, we had Liz at a meeting, we had Jack, we had Don and I. And we were trying to come up with this zoning, if you will, that Jack's come up with, you know, of the 10 feet and then 20 feet and so forth, was even at 10 feet, you might technically be in the creek when it's high water. But some of these things, what we were saying is, you know, if you've got a deck that's really close to the ground, and we looked at some that are really close to the ground, and you can't tell if they're in the creek or not. If the creek has that once in a while flood and the water comes up over this deck, is that really a problem? And when we posed the question to Liz, that's when she said we would have to go back to and have an environmental assessment done on this kind of thing to determine whether that would be that harmful, or are there ways to mitigate it or whatever. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct. And if I could, through the mayor, the concepts and the issues are right. None of us will have the answers this evening. And in fact, there are some jurisdictions that do this tiered approach that Jack's brought up. We just need an environmental team for Jack, and he'll be all set. The concepts are right. The numbers may be different because of the riparian corridor, individualities, et cetera, but there are jurisdictions that do it this way, just in terms of levels of sensitivity. So it's a matter of exploring it and funding it.
One of the things that I had discussed with Liz when we were talking about this is, and I'm sorry, Jack, this is your item, and I didn't call and discuss it with you, but I was running out of time, is that we might want to, money aside, we may want to bring this item to the council, develop some kind of policy, send that policy down to the Planning Commission to let them work out their recommendations and details that they may want to have in there, and then let it come back up to council. But what we would be doing is setting sort of this broad policy, and maybe the broad policy is what Jack's talking about, that you have these zones as you go out from the creek where you can have certain things happening. Now, we may not be able to, once we adopt that policy, if we were to do so, we couldn't actually adopt it until we had the money to do the environmental assessment.
Well, I would just recommend, I mean, rather than trying to solve this tonight at the meeting, that we kick this back to staff, let them come up with a recommendation. Their recommendation may be, you know what, how about we've got, you know, I'm looking at Barbara Patterson sitting here in the audience, who's probably saying, no, I don't want a deck. I don't care if it's going to get flooded. It's going to impact the creek more than the homeowner who's got, you know, a wet deck. So I think, you know, I don't know what my fellow council
That's the
members
whole
think.
point of the discussion. We recognize that there is a great deal of value in preserving a riparian corridor and preserving natural sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, we also recognize that we as a city council serve a number of citizens whose homes generally back up to creeks. There's at least 4 of them in this room that I can see just looking around here. And they're all different kind of creeks. And those people also would squawk mightily if we said, you can't do this in your own backyard, if it's reasonable. Now, the question is, what's reasonable? Okay, and we tried to pick out hopefully we picked out an example or two of things that were reasonable, but we also saw some pictures of things that we say, how in the world did that thing ever get built? Because it was here hanging clear over the creek. And so there are abuses in every process, and the idea is we're probably safe to stay away from extremes on either side, but let's come up with some common sense things that work, and that's the reason we wanted some more input from planning, and then eventually it'll come back up to city council.
Yeah, I agree. I was just a little nervous with this.
I have one quick question
Yes.
for the sake of brevity. What about that last sentence? Is there some way to start a process to start, you know, removing some of these non-compliant upon sale, or tell us what you want to. Because there's a start. We talked about this a long time ago, as these things are sold or.
But, you know, I would imagine most of these things are decks,
Yeah.
gardens, sheds.
Right.
The type of stuff that, you know what, and they're in the backyards. We all know that they're in the backyards. The actual probability of us even seeing them, the only thing I can think of is that someone looks at the aerial photographs and kind of goes along the creeks and goes, oh, there's one, ding, you know, and starts to do an education. Maybe we do some educational to mailing to the people who have structures that you can see from the air along the creek. And because there's not that many, I mean, out of, I don't know, how many households do we have here or properties here?
Hundreds. There's 4 creeks in the city. We have hundreds of houses that are adjoining.
Okay, so hundreds out of, you know,
But we
what,
can name those
15,000?
houses, though,
Yeah,
and we
exactly.
talked about an educational
Structures,
program that way.
single-family dwelling is 10,100, something like that.
Yeah, and out of those, maybe 500 are up on creeks. So, I mean, it's not an insurmountable task. It certainly is a task, and I think, again, figuring out what the extent of the problem to be able to say to the council, you know what, it's worthwhile to bring in someone from the standpoint of existing, letting them know, and you know, it might take staff time a couple of weeks to go through those aerial photographs and to trace them down and to identify which houses are which and addresses and send the mailings out. But I would say, you know, I would not be in favor of, you know, going in and forcing homeowners that have an existing garden shed that's been there, you know, they bought the house 5 years ago and was there. That's their lifetime in that house. You know, that shed may have gone up 10 years ago, it may have gone up, you know, 15 years ago, who knows? But I know, you know, those things are happening probably left and right because a creek is a natural setting, and so people do want to maximize their enjoyment of that asset within their backyard. So.
Well, and most people want to do that. Some people don't. Some people just want to use their backyard for storage, and they think that a creek is a ditch, or they do all sorts of stuff to the creek. That's part of the education process, though, too, you see.
Yeah.
That's where the balancing act comes in.
Oh, no, I understand. I mean, I live across the street from a creek. I know very well. I mean, I've gone to neighbors' houses, and one of them, it's nothing but overgrown ivy. You can't even see the creek. To another one where it's a beautiful deck sitting, you know, really right there, not overhanging, but, you know, so that it's within, you know, sort of sight distance of the creek. And it's, I'm not going to name names, but,
Madam Mayor, may I repeat my question? The last sentence says you guys talked about starting a process to remove some of these at the time of sale. Is that?
I think it's worthy of discussion, yes.
Okay. Because, I mean, somewhere along the line you have to do it. Maybe that's as good a time as any to try to either waive it or fix it.
I agree.
Otherwise, you know, then we're getting into this eternal debate here. I mean, it's a start, and you start chipping away a little bit at a time.
Wouldn't it be as part of the disclosure
of sale.
process? Yeah, but as part of the disclosure process that, so if we notify those homeowners that they have non-conforming structures, that they are obligated that at the time of the sale to disclose to the buyers that that they are non-conforming and that they would need to be, I mean, just like they do with anything else that's non-conforming, they go in, they have a home inspector who goes in and says, you know, you need to fix this, you need to repair that.
Madam Mayor, this is exactly why I brought it up, is because this was brought up by the Board of Realtors about 5 years ago when we first entertained this thing, and would it be a disclosable item under the?
It is.
Bob's raising his hand.
Yes, you wouldn't be, if you put that into a local code, you wouldn't be creating anything new. It's already required under the civil code on the disclosure on the sale of a house. Anything that's non-conforming, illegal, has to be disclosed at the present time. And many buyers and sellers choose to simply go ahead with the sale and not worry about it.
Yeah, it still doesn't mean it comes down.
If you wanted to enforce this, it would mean code enforcement against the properties that have illegal non-conforming encroachments into the creek or creek setback, and coming to a written agreement with them, put in the form of something like a covenant that's recorded against the property that says at the time of sale you will remove or do something. I mean, we've done that, I think, before, probably in some of the code enforcements as a practical way of resolving them.
Yeah, I would be in favor of that as long as there were some sort of exception process, and maybe it comes through EDCC, or maybe it's the, what are we calling it these days, the planning administrator, the zoning administrator that could provide some relief on a case-by-case basis for something that really didn't make that much sense or wasn't impacting or had somehow unique or special circumstances. But I think that I would be very supportive of that, because most of the time, at the time of sale, I mean, a person's vested interest in the deck in their backyard or the garden shed or whatever else, playhouse, they've lost that because they've moved on emotionally to that next home that they're moving into, or the next thing that they're moving into.
That's the singular time you're going to get a chance to do
Yeah,
that.
I agree. So I would.
So this will come back as an item as an agenda item on a.
We're not deciding this tonight, are we?
No, we're not. That's what I'm saying. It's going to have to be.
So like you're one of those four, huh? Are you one of those four?
Mr. Sir.
Yeah, no. But, so if there's general consensus to have,
Bring it back?
to bring it back with some language that maybe we might be able to consider adoption, I guess it would be an adoption of an ordinance or.
And that's just for
Would
this
be an
last
ordinance
sentence under this item, we're not.
For
talking
the
about-
Right,
covenant.
just for code enforcement.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Okay.
But this one should probably go down to planning, too, because of the setback issues.
Well, I think that needs to be resolved, absolutely, but in terms of the other, which is the legal side of it, which is how do we enforce currently non-conforming and, sort of egregiously non-conforming types of structures, I think is really the thing that's the bigger issue. Okay.
That said, thanks, Jack, for educating Matt and I a little bit. And we all, I think both Matt and I knew a lot of things, but we certainly didn't know everything from your perspective either. And we had some real good discussions on the whole process, so thanks for the time.
You're welcome.
Jack? I do have one question, Madam Mayor. I'm not sure we resolved this issue of providing a list of the status of permits. And if that's still in play for discussion, that's fine. I'll pass until that happens. But my own personal preference would be not to have the list, but to have an ongoing understanding of the expectations for issuing a permit. So a water tank permit should be available in 3 days, as an example. A permit of $20,000 should be available in 7 days, whatever it might be, so that on an ongoing basis, we know over a period of time what the department expects to do in terms of that issuance.
We can generate that.
Well, I think what you're talking about is actually a step farther. I wasn't looking for a list at all. I'm more interested in sort of a performance report, summary performance report that's done like quarterly, or at least something that says, even annually, you know what? Last year we processed, I know you know the numbers. You come to us and when we look at the fees, you're like, we've got $40 gazillion in permits outstanding. I mean, a lot. Okay, five gazillion. Still a lot. Covering a whole bunch of applications and a whole bunch of permits. And so just looking back, how well did you do against, what you're talking about is really more benchmarks. What are the standards that we should be shooting for? What I'm looking for is kind of the flip side of that, which is how well are we doing? And it's summary. I don't want to see a list every single, like our warrants list that says, here are the, these are the ones still in queue and everything else. Not at all. The other thing I would like to know is if we can separate out, because I know lots of these go through planning first, and then they go through building, and then they go through, we've got fire looking at it, we've got, who else looks at it? Public Works
Public
sometimes.
Works, Fire, Planning, and then us.
Yeah, and so, there's a couple of different departments. Are we able to sort of track the amount of time at each one of those departments as well to identify, fire, and I'm hypothetically, putting this out there, fire is taking twice as long on average as maybe they should, and it's due to staffing, levels. Okay, well, that's where we need to focus our energy in terms of bringing that up. So that's really more, that's the kind of report I would like to see.
If I could just add a comment that might be helpful. In planning, we developed sort of with IT, a GIS query system that we can track those exact features. So, and we do it two ways right now. We do it once from date of submittal and once from date of complete application, and those are very interesting differences to track. So it's super easy. Once it's set up, you can track it at any time you want, the average number of days. And we use it precisely for what Councilmember Davis was talking about, which is, number one, to set people's expectations at the counter. Applications are taking on average this amount of time, and also for budget purposes, as we know the number of items, types of applications that are coming in and what the revenue is for each item. So it really is helpful, and it's quite simple for the IT department to set up.
Madam Mayor, that's exactly what the question I asked about number 3 was. Somebody comes in I think you're both asking this, looking for about the same information. You're looking at a different end of it. But somebody comes in, has a water heater. Water heater is a
Over the
103. Okay, and then we track it. The date of application is X, but it's not completed until 5 days later. But online it says I'm missing the following 3 items. So it doesn't begin tracking. It's the same thing we do in the bank business with a loan application. It doesn't start tracking until we get a complete app. It's real easy to track, and then you go back and quote, well, what type of activity was this? Water heater, roof, whatever the simple ones are. And then we get Tom's information, which is, what's the average amount of time. And then we can generically go back and say a roof takes 22 days and it costs X $1,000. And we've processed 428 of them last year. And then, Inga, yours is that you got an outstanding report, open items that are still there, and how come they're still there. And then we can categorize and say, hey, these 4 open because they were 22 days because of an incomplete application. Got nothing to do with the applicant. We just didn't have a complete app.
Mike, I agree with you on the totally on the is the application complete or not. There's another aspect to that though is once you turn in a set of documents, how soon do you find out that your application's incomplete? In other words, if it sits there for 3 weeks and then you get it back and you're told, oh, you're missing, XYZ. Well, gosh, if I'd have known I was missing XYZ, maybe I didn't realize it.
3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago, I would have put it in. Yeah, exactly, the day after. That's why I was mentioning earlier about, having somebody just look at a set of plans. I mean, there's boilerplate stuff that you kind of know that's real obvious. I'm looking for this, this, and this. And if it's not there, send it back.
Yeah, I am doing this TI through City of Hayward, and I was amazed. I mean, sat down at the counter, was, it's a $50,000, $80,000 TI, and I had one guy from building who sort of organized the whole thing, got the planning guy over, the planning guy checked off, said, yep, looks good, all the information's here, got the building guy who kind of looked at it and said, well, I can't really look at it and tell you in detail, but here are the, the critical things I'm looking for, Title 24, blah, 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 blah. Got fire, actually, to come out because there were racks involved, and they're like, yep, okay, yep, it shouldn't be any problem. And I was just like, it was wonderful. I spent about 3 hours there by the time they all came to it. But you know what? At the end of that 3 hours, we could walk out of there knowing that I could get a permit in 10 days. And that was, that's sort of the easy way. That's what you want to do to encourage businesses. Now, agreed, on the residential side, that's a whole different ball of wax, and I would imagine it's got its own little nuances as well. So I'm not suggesting that there's a one-size-fits-all, but, if we look at these projects and sort of categorize them into markets, if you will, there might be a way to approach each one depending on the level, the intelligence, the experience level of the applicant, not the intelligence level, the experience level of the applicant, and then also the complexity of the project, and you can figure it out. My other one question I wanted to find out is, do we require all contractors who come in and pick up permits, make sure they have a San Carlos business license?
Yes, we send them upstairs.
Okay, all right, good. Anything else on this item? Jack, Don, Matt, thank you very much on behalf of the council, and
Well done.
appreciate the time and the effort, and staff will take this and carry it to the next level for us. All right, last item on our agenda, and Richard's coming up to the microphone, is actually kind of a nice one. It's a resolution that it will authorize the staff to award a professional services contract to hopefully refund our general obligation bonds for the library in the amount of $8 million. And
$800,000.
I'm sorry, no, $8 million is the bonds total, and reduce the assessments by $800,000, not $800,000 million as was posted in the agenda. So we'll correct that typo. Do you have anything to add to the staff report?
No, one other typo to correct. In the report, it says that the bonds were issued, the vote was taken on November of '96, and it was July. It was a special election.
Okay, so
June,
it's
excuse me.
June. So that's in the background on the
Right.
first page.
That's correct.
Okay.
So, Richard, is it our intent to return all the money to the taxpayers?
Yes, it is. Lower the tax rate.
Don, you have a question?
One quick question, Richard. If you're starting this process now, and the process until you close this refinancing process takes 2.5 months, When is the interest rate fixed on the new bond that you're going to refinance? Right at the tail end?
Right at the tail end, right.
Okay, and so just working some numbers backwards, potentially interest rates could go up by an amount in the next 2.5 months, and all of a sudden this isn't worthwhile. That is possible.
That's possible.
Okay. And I was just trying to figure out, and I think that in general it's about 45 basis points that they would have to go up before this is not worthwhile, so almost a half a point. Is that right?
I haven't run the numbers.
You didn't run that number?
No, I didn't.
That's an easy number to run, I'll tell you how. Anyway, but it's important to recognize that it's a 2.5-month process. And again, you could get, I mean, we could be Thanksgiving almost right before closing, and crazy things happen and rates are shot up. How much money do we have at risk there? To the point where we say, we're just going to pull the plug because it isn't worth us to do this anymore.
Well, that's why I mentioned in the report that industry standards, they say 3% savings. To me, that hardly seems worthwhile because that's a little over $200,000 in savings. It's a lot of effort on staff time to generate what would be maybe $1 a year savings to the taxpayer. It might be better to wait and sometime in the future when and if rates go down to take advantage of it at that time. My feeling is that if we can achieve somewhere in the neighborhood of $800,000 or more, which I think we can, that's a worthwhile effort for the council to approve our going forward with this. We would bring all of this back to the council after we've worked with the financial advisors, set up the team, and really got ourselves all the way to going to market. We come back to council for approval, and council approves all the documents, the refunding, and at that time we have a pretty clear picture of what the savings will be. The council determines that that's not worth it. Then we stop the process. We don't owe the vendors who have helped us get to that point because they're on their professional services bids are based on issuance of the refunding and not paying them regardless of whether we refinance or not.
Right. The only other comment I would have is that I would encourage you to, with these other people who do this all the time in the bond world, to ask them to explore the possibility of locking a rate as soon as possible prior to rates going up, and you can do that by buying a hedge. And it's done all the time in the real estate business. I can't believe that the bond industry is not that equally as sophisticated. I know they are. So just do that and see if you can lock a rate as quickly as you can.
But I comment on, I thought of the same subject. What Richard's talking about is bringing the calculations back to us, back to the council in 45 days or so.
That's correct.
The first person we're talking about is the bonding agents themselves. We have to get their approval.
You got to get the team and stuff.
Yeah,
too,
and to buy a hedge, you have to buy it up front now, and I don't think it's going to come out of the savings of doing this, and it might be a little prohibitive to do that in light of an $800,000 savings because they get pretty pricey. But you can look at it. You can look at it. But I would second Don's point is that on a 45-day basis, even 50 basis points is not going to is really not going to affect it that much because I think this is a wise thing to do now. 10% is a reasonable savings. And we are at historic lows, all time. If anything, if one looks at the 10-year yield curve, it has never been this way in 50 years.
Consistently this long.
50
I agree.
years.
Yeah,
So if we don't do it now,
Exactly.
it's time to do it. And you always have the time to come back after this 45-day period and say, hey, the savings wasn't 10%, it was only 6%. Well, that's still not enough. So you get a chance, you get a second bite at this one when he has the numbers. But what we're approving here is going forward, getting the team, getting the amount, setting the wheels of motion. This is not a, you don't just go in and get them to refi this thing tomorrow morning.
Yep, I agree.
Okay. Any other questions, discussion? Well, I think it's a pretty good idea. I mean, it's a no-brainer in my mind. So
2005-79.
Second.
Christine?
Councilmember King?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes. And with that, that was our final agenda on tonight's council meeting. I would like to just, oh, I'm sorry. Never mind. sorry about that. I do have public comment as well. Again, each speaker at this point is limited to 2 minutes, and please speak on an item not on the posted agenda. I do have a speaker slip from Horst Young. Sorry, Horst, it's after 10. I'm getting sleepy. You cannot speak on an agended item.
Yeah, Horst Young, 52 Coronado. I have a question on the subject we addressed about 3 months ago. There was I think the city commissioned a consultant to investigate the cost of an employee versus a consultant for the same job. It's been at least 3 months, nothing's been heard from, and I just want to know what happened. It needs to be addressed. It needs to come to the surface. Where is it?
Yeah, you know what, actually, I talked to Brian almost every other week about this, and before Brian, I was talking to Mike Garvey as well, saying, you know what, where is this report?
Why does it take so long?
Why is it taking so long? And Brian, would you mind clarifying
The
things?
consultant has given us some responses to our questions, and we're assembling the responses to those. It's kind of going back and forth, but I think we're getting close to the finish on it.
Any kind of estimated timeline that you're willing to commit to on
I'm
public
hoping in
meeting?
the next 4 weeks, but, we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's getting close.
Okay, so a tentative agenda item perhaps on the second meeting in October.
I hope so, yes.
Okay.
I will not address the agenda item. What I want to address is the casualness with which we deal with money. And I've said this before. Throughout these discussions, there's always, we don't have enough money. We'll show them budget. We're running $1 million short this year. This whole thing about this particular agenda item was early discussed. That should never have been discussed now. It should have been done a long time ago. Black versus gray. It's nonsense. Most trees get gray eventually. We could have saved money if we'd done this before, and not now. It's too late, obviously. That just doesn't make any sense. I'd like to drive a Ferrari too, but I can't afford one, right? We want black streets, we can't afford them. Let's face it, no. That's just silly. Another item I'd like to address is the development of Devonshire and the potential annexation. We as a city, the city management has an obligation to do the best it can for its citizens, the people that live in this town. The city has no obligation, for example, to enable anyone to benefit by annexation. This is not, is it in the city's interest? One has to ask, aside from the suitability or unsuitability of this particular property for building, how does the city benefit from that? We should look at this carefully. It is not our obligation to enable other people, regardless who they are, even if it's me, to enable these people to develop a property they bought on speculation years ago, which is worth nothing, versus today, if we annex, it will be worth a lot. The city that has no such obligation. And in fact, it's costing the city money. Can you imagine the staff time it's gone into the environmental impact report on this property? Who pays for that? The city.
No, it's the
No,
developer.
whoever
actually.
pays it, but it's in the city. What are the costs to the city if it's annexed? Now look at this very carefully. I think it behooves us to think very, very carefully about annexing a property that's basically.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your comments. And I just wanted to clarify for the record that the lowest bid actually was originally quoted for the gray rock, and the contractor agreed to use the black rock. So there was no additional cost to the city for this project. And I really don't think that this council, at least from my own personal, we don't spend money cavalierly. We do think about this. So thank you. Okay, that was our, is there anyone else from the public that wishes to speak on any item not on the posted agenda? Okay, I just, for my fellow councilmen, I just wanted to let you know our new city manager is going to be starting September 26th, so I've asked for him to come and give a brief presentation at our next council meeting, so please welcome him to San Carlos if you see him around town. And with that, we're adjourned.
You're watching San Carlos Government Television, cable channel 27.